Chapter 907. When Qin Yining heard this, he couldn't help but laugh. If this was in the past, although Pang Xiao was very popular among the people and was respected by them, he always had a sense of being high and mighty. He was not as close to the lives of the people as he was now. The current situation was exactly what Qin Yining wanted. To be able to change the direction of public opinion and make a person who was originally distant become deeply entrenched in the hearts of the people was sometimes very simple. It was clear that one could achieve anything with effort. Qin Yining was curious about the situation outside, but because he had to pretend to be a person whose entire family had died, it was not easy for him to have fun while he was in mourning. He couldn't swagger out and wander around, so he could only disguise himself and go quietly. After listening to a few stories, Qin Yining's blood was boiling. The stories that clearly didn't happen were made reasonable by the storyteller. Even she almost believed it. The storyteller's thin lips talked about the battles on the battlefield and the struggles for power. It was much more exciting than the experiences of the people who were personally involved. At the beginning of February, even the housewives in the capital knew about the story of Pang Zhao's Ji Ping Nian Yan. The image of Yu Qi Yin as a despicable person who repaid kindness with enmity became more and more deeply ingrained. Even the old women who gathered together to sunbathe would shake their heads and look at him with disdain. In the garden of the Jinan Wang residence, Yu Qi Yin stood with his hands behind his back. His white hair was tied up in a bun, and the newly made silk robe he was wearing seemed a bit too loose. When the wind blew, the robe fluttered as if it was hanging on a bamboo pole. Two older women knelt in front of him, trembling like sifting chaff. "What were you talking about just now?" "Hm? Wang Yi, this servant didn't speak." Yu Qi Yin roared, scaring the two maidservants into sobbing on the spot and repeatedly kowtowing. "This servant also doesn't know. This servant went out to buy some things and heard someone telling a story next to a small tea stall in the market. So impudent. How can you really believe the nonsense of those bumpkins outside? This servant doesn't believe it. This servant definitely doesn't believe it." The maidservants kowtowed repeatedly. Yu Qi Yin clenched his fists tightly, the veins on his forehead bulging. His whole body trembled as he gritted his teeth and said, "Guards!" Wang Yi, the steward of the Wang mansion, stepped forward and bowed. Yu Qi Yin pointed at the two women and said fiercely, "Slap their mouths. Fight. Give them a good beating." The in-charge acknowledged and waved his hand to the servants behind him. The manservant immediately came forward and pressed down on the shoulders of the two maidservants. He took out the bamboo boards and held them in his hands. The two maidservants were so scared that their faces turned pale. They repeatedly kowtowed and begged for mercy. "Wang Yi, we won't dare to do it again. Wang Yi, please spare me." This servant didn't say anything. It's the outside world. It's the outside world that's spreading the news. It would have been better if they didn't say this. When he heard that the outside world is spreading the news, Yu Qi Yin's eyes turned red. He roared, "Beat them." The servant immediately complied. He raised his arm and fiercely swung the bamboo pieces down. Only the sound of pa and pa could be heard. The two maidservants were hit so hard that they couldn't even let out a wail. In just 2 or 3 moves, their faces were swollen. Yu Qi Yin clenched his teeth and his jaw tightened. He glared at the two maidservants. The two manservants who were in charge of the punishment hit them more than a dozen times. They saw that the two maidservants were crying and their faces were swollen like balls. There were also deep purple marks on their faces. They were afraid that if they continued to hit them, their faces would be smashed. They couldn't help but slow down their movements. They hesitated and stole a glance at the steward. The steward was also hesitant. "Wang Yi, continue to hit them. Did this king ask you to stop? Could it be that you won't listen to this king's orders?" "This servant doesn't dare." The two manservants were so scared that their faces turned pale. They hurriedly moved again. The steward wanted to say something, but stopped. He lowered his head and couldn't bear to watch. Yu Qi Yin stared at the two maidservants who had been beaten until they were vomiting blood. He saw that the blood they spat out was mixed with teeth. Their faces were swollen beyond recognition. The The turbid anger in his heart seemed to have found an outlet to vent. He couldn't control the nonsense of the people outside, but could he not control the people at home? Just as Yuchi Yin stared at the two maidservants, clearly wanting to see the manservants beat them to death, Gu Shixiang rushed over with the help of two manservants. "Stop!" The old man's voice trembled, and he coughed a few times. The two manservants carrying out the punishment heard this, and immediately stopped, as if they had been pardoned. Yuchi Yin was feeling good when he was suddenly interrupted. He abruptly turned to look at Gu Shixiang. "Wang Yi," these two maidservants spoke carelessly. "They deserve to be punished. They must have learned their lesson and won't do it again in the future." Gu Shixiang cupped his hands and said, "Wang Yi, please be lenient and let them live." Yuchi Yin pursed his lips. His previously gentle eyes were now devoid of weakness and gentleness. His gaze became cold, and his expression was full of suppressed resentment. They are servants of this king's estate. They have done such a thing. If this king wants to punish them, he can. Wang Yi is right. Gu Shixiang sighed and said, "But Wang Yi has always been benevolent." "You, benevolent?" Yuchi Yin raised his chin and sneered at the hazy sky. What's the use of being benevolent? Seeing that he was about to say something that others couldn't hear, Gu Shixiang hurriedly waved his hand at the steward. The steward immediately understood and ordered the two maidservants who had been beaten unconscious to be carried out. The manservants also quietly retreated. In the blink of an eye, only Yuchi Yin and Gu Shixiang were left in the garden. "Wang Yi, this old man knows the bitterness in your heart, but you have to think about the long term. You can't throw away your greatest strength for these things." "Strength? What other strength does this king have? Are you saying that he is soft-hearted and benevolent?" "Huh, what a joke." Yuchi Yin raised his head and laughed, his eyes gradually turning red. Gu Shixiang's words of advice seemed to poke at the embarrassment that he hid in his heart and didn't want others to see. This king, soft-hearted and benevolent, is the representation of weakness. Look at what those people outside are saying about this king. Despicable villain, ungrateful. This king is the ruler of a fallen country, a useless coward. They say that this king is a bastard who licks people's shoes and drags out an ignoble existence. Who knows the bitterness of this king? Wang Yi, be careful with your words. Gu Shixiang hurriedly stopped him, afraid that Yuchi Yin would continue to say something disgraceful. This was the capital, right under the nose of Li Qitian. As long as Li Qitian wanted to, Li Qitian would know what kind of underwear Yuchi Yin was wearing. They had already been misunderstood by the people of southern Yin and had lost the support of the people. They had been attacked by the Pang Shao and had fled back to the capital. It wasn't easy for them to find shelter, so they should hide their strength and bide their time. At this time, it really wasn't good for them to cause any more trouble. But looking at Yuchi Yan's crazy appearance, Gu Shixiang only felt powerless. Yuchi Yin was still the same, not good at politics. Now, he was almost crazy, and even his previous patience and forbearance had been forgotten. Yuchi Yan's fists were clenched tightly as she huffed and puffed. Her teeth were clenched so tightly that creaking sounds could be heard. Looking at Yuchi Yin like this, the thoughts that had been lingering in Gu Shixiang's letter became clear again. He was old. In order to restore the country, he had sacrificed enough. Other than his own old life, his family, and his future, he had sacrificed everything else. But things were still in this irreversible state. Perhaps he should let go. Wang Yi, you're probably tired. Why don't you have a good rest? As for the storytellers outside talking about Pang Zhishi, someone must be behind it. It's even possible that the Pang Zhishi themselves are trying to create a positive image for themselves. You don't have to be so angry in the face of your opponent's slander. Let's just think a way to fight back. Fight back? How? Yuchi Yin was stunned for a moment, then asked anxiously. He didn't know how to think on his own when he encountered problems, but instead asked him first. Gu Shixiang couldn't help but smile bitterly at how dependent he was. I still have to think about it. Think about it? If you think about it, this king's reputation will be trampled underfoot. Did he still have a good reputation now? Gu Shixiang sighed inwardly and shook his head. He only said that he would go back and think about it, then left the residence. Yin didn't get a solution to the problem. When he thought about how the two servants gossiped behind his back, he got angry. That night, he ordered people to throw the two servants out of the residence, and no one was allowed to save them. The next day, the news that two corpses were found in front of the Jinan residence spread. Bing Tang frowned and said to Qin Yining, "This is too cruel. I heard that the two servants' faces were badly swollen. All of their teeth were knocked out, and one of their cheekbones was broken. They were thrown out while they were still running a high fever. The weather is cold, but it doesn't freeze water. The two of them were thrown to the cold ground and died overnight." Ji Yin was filled with righteous indignation when he heard this. They really have no regard for human lives. There's always a reason to punish servants, whether it's punishment or selling them. Although there are cases of private punishment like this, there's no such thing as brazen. Does the Jinan prince not care about his reputation? Qin Yining sighed and said, "He's probably too angry. With Yu Qian's temper, it wasn't strange for him to do something like this." Qin Yining didn't know how to feel about the former kind-hearted person becoming like this. In any case, they were standing on opposite sides. Both of them wanted the treasure, so there was no turning back. Daxing Estate. Huzi said with exultation, "Wang Yi, there are commoners praising you everywhere in the capital. Even a 3-year-old child knows about your deeds. Hey, Wang Fei is really amazing. In such a short period of time, your reputation among the commoners has become so high. Why didn't we think of this method before?" Pang Xiao said with a smile. In the past, she needed to keep a low profile. Now she's high profile. Huzi asked, "Wang Yi, can we enter the city now?" Pang Xiao stood up and stretched his stiff muscles. He said, "Pass down the order. Prepare the carriages and horses. We'll set off immediately." Pang Xiao led 20 or so tiger spirits and the two strategists, Xie and Su, to rush to the capital. They were twice as fast as Qin Yining. But when they arrived at the city gates, Pang Xiao ordered them to set up camp and not enter the city. There were many commoners and carriages going in and out of the city on the road in front of the city gates. Pang Xiao's group of 20 or so people had set up a few tents not far away. It was especially eye-catching because there was a bright flag on the tents with a neatly written swastika character on it. The commoners who were literate knew that Prince Zhongshuan's group had arrived outside the city. Chapter 908. Princess Consort. Princess Consort. Wang Ye's troops are back. Bing Tang quickly walked into the room and said crisply. Qin Yining was sewing when she heard this. Her hands paused and she looked back to ask, "Have they already entered the capital?" "Not yet. The people in the residence received the news when they went out to buy some things. They said that Wang Yi and his troops are stationed not far from the city gates. It's already been a night, but they have no intention of entering the city." Bing Tang's tone was puzzled. Could it be that Wang Yi has other things to do? Qin Yining continued to sew when she heard this. Her smile was gentle and sweet. She did not tell Pang Xiao what she was going to do after entering the city. However, Pang Xiao had returned to the capital and stationed himself outside the city. This meant that he had quickly made a decision to cooperate with her after learning about the situation in the city. How could she not be happy with such tacit understanding? It's fine. If they're willing to station themselves outside the city, then let them be for now. We don't have to worry and just live our own lives. Bing Tang saw that Qin Yining was so calm and guessed that her masters had other plans. She was not worried anymore. At the same time, the people in the capital's restaurants, tea houses, and streets were all discussing this matter. In their hearts, Pang Xiao's image was at its most glorious. The great hero had returned and was going to openly walk in through the city gates. Didn't this mean that they would all have a chance to see the true face of the great hero up close? The people were very excited and were all looking forward to it. All the diners on the first floor of the restaurant were discussing it. Perhaps Prince Zhongshuan came back too late yesterday, and the city gates were already closed. That's why he stationed himself outside the city for a night. After he finished his preparations today, he immediately came back. Perhaps that's how it is. Then should we go to the city gates and wait? Don't tell us that Wang Yi and his men have already returned to the residence. Then wouldn't we not be able to see the great hero? Hey, do you guys think that the great hero pacified the Southern Yan Rebellion? Your Majesty will definitely reward him handsomely, right? Definitely. Your Majesty might even personally go out of the palace to welcome Wang Yi. Tang Xiu was mixed in the crowd. She heard the discussion of the crowd. She smiled and took a sip of wine, threw a broad bean in her mouth, and chewed it. Wang Fei's prophecy was amazing. With just a few books, all the people in the city were excited. Now, the way they welcomed Pang Xiao was even more admiring than the family members who had followed the army when they attacked the city gates of Beiji. At this time, someone had already gone to scout ahead. There were also shops that faced the street, where one could see the position of the pedestrians on the street by opening the windows. They were also fought over by the commoners. Many families refused to return and waited for Pang Xiao to enter the city. On top of the city gate, Gong Zongqi looked at Pang Xiao's camp, not far from the city, and could not help but frown. Commander, what do you think Prince Zhongshuan is doing? Why is he not willing to enter the city when he is here? Right now, many commoners have gathered on the streets of the city. They all want to see Wang Yi return to the city. If Wang Yi does not come in, the city will become chaotic. Yes, Commander, what should we do? Should we report back to the higher-ups? If there is chaos among the commoners, it will be hard for us to explain. Gong Zongqi frowned and said in a low voice, the commoners in the city are already in such a state. The higher-ups should have known long ago. Forget it. After reporting back, it is good to let the 5 cities warden's office make preparations. Yes, with so many commoners gathered in one place, it is inevitable that some rascals will take the opportunity to cause trouble. The 5 cities warden's office can avoid some trouble by being on guard. Everyone looked at the camp not far from the city. They all had the same thought. Prince Zhongshuan, hurry up and enter the city. Pang Xiao was reading a book in his tent. Huzi brought over steamed buns, smoked meat, and pickled vegetables. He smiled and said, Wang Yi, time to eat. Pang Xiao nodded. Sit down. Let's eat together. Okay. Huzi agreed. The two of them had fought together and gone through fire and water many times. It was common for them to eat from the same bowl. Wang Yi, when do you plan on entering the city? Huzi took a big bite of the steamed bun and asked in a muffled voice. Pang Xiao said, let's just wait here. When the time comes, there will be someone in a hurry to let us enter the city. Huzi scratched the back of his head and nodded. He did not ask any more questions. It did not matter if he did not understand. Wang Yi and Wang Fei clearly had a tacit understanding. As followers, as long as they followed orders, they would not make a mistake. The bustle in the city continued until night fell. The commoners waited for an entire day, but did not see anyone come. It was time for the curfew. Although everyone wanted to wait a little longer, they had to go home because of the curfew. Today, Wang Yi did not enter the city. Perhaps he was held back by something. Let's come early tomorrow and wait. His Highness will enter the city tomorrow no matter what. What you say makes sense. Tomorrow, maybe we can get a good spot and see the great hero up close. The city gate guards and the people of the 5 cities warden's office saw that the commoners had listened to orders and left. They could not help but let out a long sigh of relief. If these people gathered together to cause trouble, they would be difficult to deal with. Commander Gong and the commander of the 5 cities warden's office were thinking that perhaps Wang Yi would enter the city tomorrow morning. But the next day, there was still no movement from Pang Xiao's side. The number of commoners in front of the city gates and even on the streets increased. Even the tea houses and restaurants along the streets became more and more popular. In the afternoon, the chatter of the commoners, who had been excitedly waiting to see the great hero, died down. The waiting became impatient. Someone began to complain and ask, why hasn't he entered the city yet? At this time, someone in the crowd whispered, Wang Yi has done a great service in pacifying the south this time. Why is there no one from the court to welcome him? When these words were said, it immediately woke everyone up. That's right. For such a great contributor, there should be a lively welcoming ceremony. Haven't you seen how in the past, when the great generals returned from war, Your Majesty would send important officials to welcome them? Right. I still remember when the Protector General of the country was still alive, there were several great victories. At that time, the emperor would personally welcome him. When the Protector General Peng Zhongjing was mentioned, everyone quickly thought of a problem that they had overlooked. Isn't Prince Zhongshuan the Protector General's posthumous son? He really is a Huzi of a general's family. That's right. Dragons give birth to dragons, and phoenixes give birth to phoenixes. Look at the Protector General's family bloodline. Speaking of this, the old people who had personally seen Peng Zhongjing's execution began to feel uneasy. Really, at that time, the incapable ruler was simply killed with 1,000 knives. Protector General Peng was such a good person, but in the end, he ended up like that. That's right. When the Protector General's blood spilled in the capital and the Peng family's blood flowed like a river, many people would still feel a lingering fear when they thought of it. It was precisely because the incapable ruler was afraid of the meritorious minister that he had tortured and killed Peng Zhongjing that the long-suppressed anger of the people erupted like a tsunami. And now, it was precisely because of Peng Zhongjing's son that they wanted to avenge the Protector General's death. Thinking of what had happened at that time, everyone's heart was very heavy. Now, Prince Zhongshuan, who had made a great contribution and returned to the capital, was actually quietly living in a tent outside the city with 12 people. In a place like the capital, if a plaque fell, it would hit 3 high-ranking officials. There were so many officials in the imperial court, but none of them said anything about going to welcome him. But when Jinan Wang fled back from the south, Your Majesty even arranged for a high-ranking official from the Ministry of Rights to welcome him. The dignified Prince Zhongshuan, the great hero who pacified the South, was treated worse than a despicable villain. Some people were outspoken and thought so they said so. These words resonated in many people's hearts, and they couldn't help but whisper in each other's ears. They didn't dare to loudly discuss the matters of the imperial court, but seeing Prince Zhongshuan being treated so coldly, and thinking of the Protector General who didn't have a good ending, no one felt comfortable in their hearts. There were even some straightforward people who directly said, Prince Zhongshuan wouldn't have a life as miserable as his father, right? Some people sucked in a breath of cold air when they heard this and whispered to the people next to them. There were also some people who were more cautious. Seeing that the situation here wasn't good, they quietly hid. But the majority of the people still stayed where they were. Everyone's mood changed from the initial excitement to the current anger. The content of the discussion also changed. The people of the warden's office of the 5 cities were maintaining order on the streets. So how could they not hear these discussions? They shouted loudly, and the commoners shut their mouths in front of them. But the moment they turned around, the buzzing sounds of discussion rang out again. They couldn't capture all the commoners in the city. Faced with the tidal wave of discussion, they could only stare helplessly. There was nothing they could do. A large number of people had gathered in the capital, and the content of the discussion was very unpleasant. How could Li Qiqian not know? At this time, someone had already reported what had happened in front of the city gates to Li Qiqian. Your Majesty, right now the people are gathered in the streets, all waiting to see Prince Zhongshuan enter the city. But Prince Zhongshuan has not moved. If they continue to gather, I'm afraid that something bad will happen. Your Majesty, please make a decision quickly. Li Qiqian sat with a dark expression behind the black desk of the imperial study. His hands were tightly clenched into fists, so he didn't curse out loud. What is he trying to do? The soldiers are at the city gates, threatening Zhen? The officials heard this and bowed their heads. They knew that Your Majesty was confused by anger. Pang Xiao only had 12 or so people at his side. How could this count as soldiers at the city gates? Li Qiqian looked at Lu Heng, who had been silent the whole time, and said, Zhong Yibo, what do you think about this? Lu Heng stepped forward and bowed. Your Majesty, this official thinks that at this time, we should think of a way to calm the people. Calm the people? What was the people's voice? Li Qiqian knew what the people were talking about and what they were thinking. He was the son of heaven. Did he have to act according to other people's wishes? Li Qiqian said in a low voice, Xiong Jinshui, this servant is here. The head eunuch Xiong Jinshui came forward and bowed. Li Qitian ordered, "Go and pass on Zhen's order. Tell Prince Zhongshuan to quickly enter the palace and meet his majesty. Don't delay." Xiong Jinshui bowed and said, "This servant obeys." Then he quickly retreated and did as he was told. Chapter 909. Lu Heng also did not dare to say anything at this time. One had to pay attention to the timing and observe the situation. Since this matter did not involve his own life, there was no need for him to provoke the Son of Heaven's displeasure and bring trouble to himself for no reason. However, Lu Heng, who had his eyes lowered, didn't agree with Li Qitian's actions. "Your Majesty is a resourceful person. To say something disrespectful, how could a person who was able to use the banner of Chao Zhongjing to rise to power and successfully sit on the throne be an idiot?" But now, perhaps because he had been high and mighty for too long, he didn't like to use his brain when doing things. He preferred to use thunderous methods to suppress others. Pang Zhishi looked like a boorish man, but he was meticulous and knew how to make good use of people. I heard that Qin Yining had returned a long time ago, but Pang Xiao hadn't. When Pang Xiao returned to the capital, the situation in the capital was like this. It was very obvious that this was a scene that the husband and wife had planned. Your Majesty didn't care at all and stepped into the trap. The most frightening thing was that the husband and wife had probably already predicted Your Majesty's personality and the thoughts of the court officials. They knew that, as officials, no one would stop Your Majesty from walking into the trap when he was extremely angry. They had calculated everything perfectly. What appeared in Lu Heng's mind was Qin Yining's spirited little face and wise eyes. His heart sank. This woman, in the end, didn't belong to him. The disappointment and unwillingness in his heart couldn't be dispelled. Lu Heng could only pretend to be calm and not let his thoughts leak out. In front of the city gate, there were even more commoners than before. The scene was as lively as a temple fair. There were even smart vendors shuttling through the crowd, selling sesame seed cakes, tea eggs, and other food. There were also young girls around the age of 10 carrying baskets of sweet fruits and caramel candy. The capital in early spring was still very cold. Everyone had waited for so long that they were already hungry. If the conditions allowed, they naturally bought food to eat. Right at this moment, a fast horse suddenly galloped past on the main street. Sitting on the horse was an eunuch wearing an iron-gray, round-collared sunflower gown. The commoners all stared in the direction that the eunuch had left. They only saw him arrive at the city gates and say a few words to the soldiers guarding the gates. Naturally, he was allowed to leave the city. Some people in the crowd began to speculate. Could it be an imperial edict from the palace? Very likely. But with Wang Ye's great contributions, even if Your Majesty doesn't personally welcome him, you should at least arrange a high-ranking official. What is the meaning of sending a eunuch to call him in? "Hey, you brat, are you tired of living? How dare you spout nonsense?" Although there were people who tried to dissuade them, it was not just one person who had such thoughts. The topic that had been discussed in the crowd was once again brought up. The commoners exchanged their thoughts as they ate. There were even people who were speculating that Pang Xiao was treated coldly even though he had performed meritorious deeds. It was most likely because his meritorious deeds had shocked the emperor. Hey, someone outside the city saw that master eunuch go to see Wang Yi. Someone near the city gates said loudly. The news spread by word of mouth. Very quickly, the surrounding commoners all knew that the eunuch had really gone to pass on an imperial edict. The speculations and discussions were even harder to suppress. The people of the warden's office of the 5 cities were sweating profusely as they tried to maintain order and scold those who were talking nonsense. But with so many people present, how could they manage all of them? In the temporary camp outside the city, Xiong Jinshui was all smiles as he bowed to Pang Xiao. "Wang Yi, Your Majesty has ordered you to immediately enter the city and enter the palace to meet the emperor. Wang Yi has been away for so long. Your Majesty must be missing Wang Yi." Pang Xiao smiled and cupped his hands in the direction of the capital. This subject obeys the decree. Then he turned around and gave the order to break camp. Xiong Jinshui hadn't thought that things would go so smoothly. He couldn't help but let out a sigh of relief. Wang Yi had returned to the capital, but was not willing to enter the city gates. He must have his own plans. Your Majesty called him back with one sentence and even arranged for him, an internal court official, to pass on a message. This was indirectly expressing Your Majesty's dissatisfaction with Pang Zhao's delay in entering the city. His status was low, and his words carried little weight. He didn't dare to question Your Majesty and didn't dare to speak too much in front of Wang Yi. It was very difficult. He was most afraid that Wang Yi would be dissatisfied and capture him to punish him. Not to mention punishment, even if he was killed, Your Majesty probably wouldn't do anything to Wang Yi. Wouldn't he have lost his little life for nothing? Fortunately, Wang Yi was not an unreasonable person. Huzi and the others were already prepared to break camp. Hearing this, they quickly packed up everything. Soon, Pang Xiao ordered the troops to set out. Seeing him so straightforward, Xiong Jinshui's face was also full of smiles. He mounted his horse and followed Pang Zhao's troops to the city gates. Soon, they arrived in front of the city gates. There were already many commoners who had stopped to watch. Gong Zongqi quickly walked out and respectfully bowed. This subordinate, Gong Wan, pays his respects to Wang Yi. Pang Xiao dismounted and helped Gong Zongqi up. He smiled and said, "It's you. I haven't seen you in 2 years. You haven't changed much." Facing such a forthright Pang Xiao, Gong Zongqi naturally thought of the days when he was under Pang Xiao. A sense of joy and respect spontaneously arose. Gong Zongqi's face turned red from excitement. He grinned and said, "Wang Yi still remembers me. Of course. We're brothers. How could you not remember?" Not far away, the commoners heard the conversation between the two. Some of them whispered, "Wang Yi is indeed a righteous and benevolent man. Wang Yi doesn't put on any airs at all." Usually, Pang Xiao would not purposely talk to the commoners by the roadside. At this time, he would have mounted his horse and directly entered the city. But today, he smiled and greeted the commoners by the roadside. When the commoners saw this, they felt as if a big meat pie had fallen from the sky and hit their heads. They were so happy that they were dizzy. Some cupped their hands, some bowed, some kowtowed, some praised, some thanked, and some were so excited that they could not say a word. The commoners' excited expressions and cheerful voices mixed together. The enthusiasm was so warm that it could turn early spring into midsummer. Pang Xiao smiled and cupped his hands to return the greetings. He even responded to some of the greetings that could be heard clearly. He answered some of the questions that could be heard, such as, "How's the South? Is life tough? Will Southern Yin send troops? Have the bandits who killed family Qin been caught?" Qin Yining returned to the capital in plain clothes. The prince's residence was desolate and had to hire new people. The news that all of the family Qin's family members, the old madam and old master of the prince's residence, were killed by bandits on their way to the south had already spread. The great hero had protected the south for the country and the commoners so that they could live and work in peace. However, his mother, elders, and his wife's family had all died. Many commoners could empathize with such a tragedy and felt sympathy. Compared to Pang Zhao's suffering, they felt pity and respect for him. Thus, there were people who asked about and comforted Pang Xiao. Pang Xiao took his people a few steps toward the city gate and had to stop to answer the commoners' questions. Seeing that he was so easygoing, the commoners were emboldened and began to talk to Pang Xiao. Xiong Jinshui followed beside Huzi and led the horse behind Pang Xiao. He was so anxious that his forehead was sweating. It was still too early for him to be happy. There was a little person in Xiong Jinshui's heart that was crazily screaming, "This servant is begging you, my Wang Yi. Hurry up and enter the palace. Your Majesty has waited for so long in vain. I'm afraid he's going to show his might. This servant can't bear it." However, Pang Xiao didn't understand Xiong Jinshui's inner wailing at all. He still warmly greeted the commoners. Seeing that Pang Xiao had returned, the commoners all rushed to the city gate. The great hero in their hearts was like a celestial being from heaven. His aura was even more powerful than the angry Vajra in the temple. Although he was powerful, he spoke to them so gently and without arrogance. The commoners, who had been listening to stories and fantasizing, were extremely excited to see the great hero up close. Pang Xiao was surrounded by the commoners. Even a warden's office's scolding had no effect. Pang Xiao didn't stop the commoners. Instead, he appeared even more gentle. Pang Xiao's group had only walked 100 steps into the city gate, but it took them more than 2 hours to walk. Gong Zongqi, Xiong Jinshui, and the people from the warden's office were about to cry. The biggest problem was that there were many people in the city. When they heard that the great hero had entered the city, they all hurried over. It was already chaotic in front of the city gate, but they didn't know how many more commoners would come. Pang Xiao saw that there were many people and was afraid that someone would accidentally fall and be trampled. Therefore, he shouted, "Everyone, don't push. Be careful. Don't fall." Pang Xiao's words were immediately echoed by people in the crowd. The people in the crowd were too embarrassed to push with all their strength. Qin Yining was sitting by the window on the second floor of the tea house. He smiled as he looked at the tightly packed crowd at the city gate. Bing Tang was also shocked. It's already been more than 2 hours. Wang Yi has only walked this far. How long will it take for him to reach the palace? Qin Yining smiled helplessly. The commoners are too enthusiastic. He can't do anything about it. Qin Yining nodded to Tang Xiu behind him. Tang Xiu immediately nodded and quietly retreated. Soon, another voice came from the crowd. Wang Yi is such a great hero, and he's such a good person. He sacrificed his own family to protect Ardezhou. Why are there only us bumpkins coming to welcome him? Why didn't the imperial court arrange for someone to come? When this topic was brought up again, the commoners who had close contact with Pang Xiao and even talked to Pang Xiao were the most indignant. Just as that voice said, they were also dissatisfied that Pang Xiao was treated so coldly. More and more people complained. In the hearts of the commoners, Pang Xiao was a hero, a famous general. If the Son of Heaven was a wise ruler, he should treat famous generals with courtesy like how the storytellers described. If he could personally welcome them, it would be more in line with everyone's imagination. Regardless of whether this imagination was reasonable or not, most people thought so. Some people said whatever they thought, and the complaints increased. In the imperial study, Li Qitian waited for 4 hours, but no one came. He was so angry that he slammed the table. Chapter 9-10. Several of his trusted officials bowed respectfully, not daring to say anything. Li Qitian was only complaining, so he didn't need a definite answer. He pursed his lips and sulked for a long time. Just as he was about to give orders, a burst of hurried footsteps came from outside the hall. Following that, an eunuch wearing an iron-gray round-necked sunflower gown quickly walked in. After saluting, he whispered a few words in Li Qitian's ear. Li Qitian was originally restraining his emotions, but after hearing the eunuch's report, he was finally on the verge of exploding. Impudent! He dares! Li Qitian suddenly roared angrily, scaring several people in the hall. They hurriedly knelt down and kowtowed. "Your Majesty, please calm down." Several people were quite confused. What exactly was your Majesty angry about? Li Qitian said. He's just an insignificant official. He went to the south to do business, so it's his duty to do well. Besides, if we didn't give him a chance to perform, how could he have made a name for himself? Now, he's deliberately stirring up this kind of public opinion. The eunuch knelt on the ground, not daring to say anything. Li Qitian asked again, "Is this what the common people in the city are saying?" Replying to your Majesty, many people are saying this. They feel that your Majesty didn't personally go to greet them. It's really bullshit. What a big piece of bullshit. Li Qitian was so angry that he cursed. The officials who had been in the hall this whole time were all shrewd people. Thinking about the situation outside and seeing your Majesty's angry appearance, it was obvious what was going on. Lu Heng, in particular, secretly shook his head again. He sighed with emotion at Qin Yining and Pang Xiao's meticulous planning. They had clearly calculated your Majesty's temperament and all the variables. After Li Qitian cursed, his face darkened and he didn't say a word. He was worried that in his anger, he would say something disgraceful. That would be too degrading to his status as the emperor. However, The situation outside was too infuriating. Could it be that no one remembers Pang Zhishi's disobedience to the imperial edict? Now, everyone was praising him for his achievements. He was just an official. Since he had done his job well, did he still need to personally welcome him as the emperor? Your Majesty, what do you plan to do? An old official asked tentatively. Li Qitian said in a deep voice, Zhen will wait here. Let's see how long he can delay. But Your Majesty, there are so many people outside. I'm afraid that even if Prince Zhongshuan comes late, it's because the people are pushing and shoving. Lu Heng said. Li Qitian's face was gloomy, and he gnashed his teeth. He wants to use his merits to force me? Your Majesty, the people are acting on their own accord, Lu Heng reminded submissively. However, because of Lu Heng's seemingly unintentional words, Li Qitian was burning with anger. Acting on their own accord? The people supported Pang Zhishi, and they even dared to privately complain that he was harsh on loyal officials. They even wanted him, the emperor, to personally welcome an official. The storytellers first appeared in the city, followed by the voices of the people. Before he could do anything to suppress them, Pang Xiao came back. He was even stationed outside the city and refused to come in. He waited until he was angry and gave the order before he was willing to return to the city. When he returned to the city, he immediately caused this situation. Li Qitian was not a stupid person. Even if he didn't realize it at the beginning, he had already figured it out. He had fallen into a trap. Acting on their own accord? Let's see how long they can act on their own accord. When Lu Heng heard this, he didn't try to persuade him anymore. In the end, after waiting for another hour, the spies reported that Pang Xiao had already moved forward a street with difficulty, and the number of people was increasing. Did all the people in the capital gather there? Li Qitian finally smashed his teacup in anger. The sound of broken porcelain was sharp and ear-piercing, and it made people's hearts tremble. Lu Heng and the others bowed their heads respectfully again. At this time, they all knew in their letters that they didn't need to persuade him in detail. With Your Majesty's intelligence, what else could he not understand? However, although Li Qitian understood in his heart, that decision didn't make him feel good. Lu Heng, this official is here. Lu Heng, who was called out, knelt straight and listened quietly with his eyes lowered. Li Qitian said, Tell me, what should we do now? Lu Heng couldn't help but struggle in his heart. If he followed Li Qitian's temper, he would naturally scold Pang Zhishi and then persuade Li Qitian to wait in place. He didn't believe that Pang Zhishi could walk for 3 days and 3 nights in such a short distance. However, these words might be useful to Your Majesty now, but after Your Majesty calmed down, he would inevitably feel that he was being too slippery and flattering. Thinking of this, Lu Heng calmly said, replying to Your Majesty, in this official's opinion, for the sake of expanding public opinion and for the sake of Your Majesty's reputation and image among the people, it would be best for Your Majesty to satisfy the expectations of the people. What Lu Heng said was actually what Li Qitian was thinking. However, this judgment made him feel too sullen. Li Qitian remained silent. Lu Heng continued to consolidate his image as a loyal official who dared to speak his mind. He said in a low voice, Your Majesty, at this time, the people in the capital have gathered together. Regardless of whether or not chaos will occur, if you don't express your stance and allow Prince Zhongshuan to enter the palace, the public opinion will definitely be biased towards Prince Zhongshuan. There might even be people with ulterior motives who will secretly slander Your Majesty and promote negative opinions. This official believes that since the matter has already reached this point, we should deal with it rationally and reduce losses. Although Li Qitian was angry, Lu Heng's words were very pertinent. Every word was for his sake, and he also understood. Li Qitian asked the others. Extremely senior officials were well versed in the ways of an official and were the best at reading people's expressions. They immediately expressed the same opinion as Lu Heng. Li Qitian's face was as calm as water. After a long time, he said, Prepare the carriage. We're going out of the palace to personally welcome Prince Zhongshuan back to the capital. Immediately, the eunuchs responded and began to make preparations with great fanfare. Your Majesty is going out of the palace in person. Naturally, the extravagance will not be small. It has to be done according to the rules, and the preparations are quite tedious. Fortunately, the Jinwu guards and the Qinshou guards are always on standby. At this time, Pang Xiao was leading the troops slowly through the crowd with his horse. The people were also cordially surrounding Pang Xiao, admiring the handsome face of the great hero up close. At this time, a commotion came from the distance. It's His Majesty is coming. The sound of a gong opening the way came from afar. In the distance, a yellow umbrella could be seen fluttering in the wind under the light gray sky. A figure wearing a red round-necked robe with arrow sleeves was sitting upright on the shoulder of the umbrella, like the stars surrounding the moon. Your Majesty is coming out of the palace. The people were shocked. The Jinwu guards and the Qinshou guard were vigilant. Even the people from the warden's office were so scared that their foreheads were covered in cold sweat. Your Majesty is a descendant of the heavens. If an accident happens, even if all of them were to be beheaded, it wouldn't be enough to accompany him to the grave. However, the people didn't think this way. In the stories, the wise His Majesty loved the talented. In reality, everything was developing according to their expectations. As a result, the voices that were criticizing Your Majesty for treating the meritorious subjects harshly died down. Instead, it was replaced by a cacophony of praises. Your Majesty really values Prince Zhongshuan very much. It must be because Wang Ye's contributions this time are too great. Your Majesty can't help but come out to personally welcome him. What a great honor this is. That's right. Your Majesty is wise. Wang Yi Xiaoyong. The voices of the crowd rose and fell. The people all knelt on the ground and shouted, "Long live Your Majesty!" Although the cries of "Long live Your Majesty" drowned out the initial discussions, Li Qiqian could still clearly hear what the people were saying. Although his arrival refuted the rumors of him treating the meritorious subjects harshly, it also confirmed the fact that Pang Xiao was a meritorious subject. As a result, if he punished Pang Xiao for the crime of resisting the imperial decree, wouldn't he be giving the people a reason to criticize him? Pang Xiao was a meritorious subject. Not only did he not reward him, he even found an excuse to punish him. At that time, his reputation would definitely plummet. What a good Pang Zhishi! What a vicious plan! Li Qitian's heart was already burning with anger. However, he still had a very gentle smile on his face. He even occasionally waved at the kneeling people in greeting. The people saw that the emperor was so amiable and approachable. Everyone was so happy that they were about to go crazy. The cheers sounded again, shocking everyone's hearts like a tsunami. Pang Xiao was flattered and gave the reins to someone beside him. He walked out of the crowd and knelt on the ground, saying, "This subject greets Your Majesty. Long live Your Majesty! Long live Your Majesty! Long live Your Majesty!" Younger brother, don't be like this. Li Qiqian took off his shoulder sling and helped Pang Xiao up with a smile on his face. He held Pang Xiao's hand affectionately and looked him up and down. Then, he patted Pang Xiao's shoulder and said, "You've become stronger after going to the south." Pang Xiao smiled and respectfully said, "Replying to Your Majesty, perhaps it's because I've been in the military for too long. I didn't pay attention and became like this. Has Your Majesty always been well?" "Zhen is very well. It's because of loyal subjects like you who do your best to work for Zhen that Zhen can handle state affairs without any distractions. You've done very well. Your Majesty praises me too much. All of this is this subject's duty. I don't deserve Your Majesty's praise." Pang Xiao was about to bow again as he spoke. Since Li Qiqian had come, he would not leave any room for gossip. He immediately took Pang Xiao's arm and stopped him from bowing. He pulled him and said, "Come, quickly return to the palace. Zhen still has many things to ask you about the border." "Yes," Pang Xiao respectfully responded. Li Qiqian mounted his shoulder armor, and Pang Xiao finally mounted his tall horse. With the protection of the 5 cities' warden's office and the holy chariot's ceremonial guards, and with the fact that the people had gotten their wish to see the meeting between a wise ruler and a meritorious subject, they were extremely excited. Everyone retreated to the sides in an orderly manner. The stagnant troops finally moved slowly behind the holy chariot. The cheers of the people were earth-shaking. On one hand, Li Qiqian maintained his dignity. On the other hand, he had to appear amiable. He suppressed the anger in his heart and secretly clenched his fists until his knuckles turned white. Just as the troops moved less than 100 steps, Pang Xiao, who was originally sitting upright on the horse, suddenly swayed. He held his temples with one hand, and his eyes rolled back as he fell off the horse. "Your Highness!" The commoners were all scared silly and shouted in panic. Huzi, Jinghu Wei, and the others beside the horse quickly caught him. They saw that Pang Zhao's eyes were tightly shut, and he had already fainted. Wang Yi, quick, find a doctor." The crowd was in chaos again. Li Qiqian had just gotten a little more comfortable when he turned around and saw this scene again. He was so angry that his soul almost left his body. How could a man as tall as a small mountain faint for no reason? He was sure that Pang Zhishi did it on purpose. But the people did not think so. Someone in the crowd had already said, "Wang Yi must have been too tired because of Nanjiang. He must have been tired from the journey and fell sick. Perhaps he suffered some injuries on the battlefield and developed a chronic illness." Chapter 9:11. With so many pairs of eyes watching, what could Li Qiqian do at this time? He could only suppress the anger in his heart and complete the act. He got off his shoulder armor and personally went to check the situation. He loudly ordered someone to call for an imperial physician and pinch Pang Zhao's philtrum. Li Qiqian held his breath and did not hold back. If it was an ordinary person who pretended to faint, they would have jumped up from the pinch. But Pang Xiao was still lying on the ground, powerless. Huzi, Xieyu, Su Weiji, and Jinghu Wei saw Li Qiqian viciously pinch Wang Yi up close. They really wanted to go forward and kick him away, but their status was too different. The emperor was willing to condescend to be the most benevolent, and they could not move. At this time, there was a commotion outside the crowd. The common people parted to the sides like Moses parting the sea, and they all fixed their eyes on a woman in plain clothes who was walking quickly over. Qin Yining's beautiful face lost all color. Her bright and beautiful face was pale, and her glittering eyes were watery, making people feel pity for her. Wang Yi. Qin Yining staggered to Pang Zhao's side and took the opportunity to rudely push Li Qiqian away. "Wang Yi, don't scare this concubine, Wang Yi." Others did not dare to push Li Qiqian away, but she was Pang Zhao's wife. Seeing her husband faint, Li Qiqian could not pursue the matter no matter what she did in a moment of desperation. Otherwise, if he argued with a woman, would he still have any face? Li Qiqian stood up and looked coldly at the couple's act. However, there was no evidence, and there was no way to expose them. He gritted his teeth, but there was nothing he could do. "Wang Yi, this concubine has nothing left. You are this concubine's only support. Nothing can happen to you." Qin Yining's tears fell like beads from a broken necklace. The sorrowful cries that sounded like those of an angry cat made many soft-hearted commoners feel sour in their noses. Why was it so tragic? "Your Majesty still hasn't given us a clear explanation for Lord Qin's disappearance in the north." All of the family Qin's relatives, including Wang Fei's twins, were also killed by bandits on their way back to their hometown. The once enviable and happy woman was now dressed in white. Her family, relatives, and children were all gone overnight. Now, even her husband was sick and lying on the ground. Some people also shed tears. There were also people who were puzzled. The emperor's attitude towards Qin Huaiyuan's death was too thought-provoking. Many people couldn't help but start to speculate. Bandits had appeared on the Spirit Road and killed everyone. This was an earth-shattering tragedy, but the imperial court had not sworn an oath to capture the culprit. It was difficult for them not to suspect that someone had done this on purpose. Why? Wasn't it because Prince Zhongshuan's achievements overshadowed the emperor's? Some of the commoners were astute enough to analyze this. Many of the court officials thought this, but no one had the courage to say it out loud. After Li Qiqian's anger subsided, he quickly realized that he had fallen into a trap again. He angrily gritted his teeth and anxiously said, Why haven't you called the imperial physician yet? Yes. Xiong Jinshui hurriedly ordered the eunuch accompanying him. Bing Tang stepped forward at this time and took out a thin silver needle used for acupuncture. Wang Fei, let this servant try. Qin Yining nodded repeatedly. She moved to the side and used her sleeve to wipe her tears. When the sleeve came close to her eyes immediately turned red and tears rolled out again. She cried like a pear blossom in the rain. Bing Tang pricked Pang Zhao's body twice. Pang Xiao immediately woke up. Qin Yining rushed forward in surprise. Wang Yi. Pang Xiao was lying on the ground. When she saw Qin Yining, who had been separated for many days, she couldn't help but smile. Sister Yi. Qin Yining also smiled through her tears. She helped Pang Xiao up and said, Wang Yi, are you okay? You really scared this concubine. When Qin Yining helped Pang Xiao up, he accidentally stained Pang Zhao's face with his sleeve. A spicy and stimulating feeling suddenly rushed up, and his eyes immediately turned red. Pang Xiao couldn't help but feel helpless. Wasn't there too much ginger juice? No wonder his precious sister Yi cried so pitifully. However, many people around them still saw the tearful appearance of the husband and wife looking at each other. Many people thought of the hero's sad situation and felt sad. Some people even wiped away their tears. Pang Xiao was helped up by Qin Yining. He bowed weakly to Li Qitian. Your Majesty, please forgive this official. This official offended Your Majesty. Your Majesty, please punish this official. Could Li Qitian punish him? If he was punished, he was afraid that he would be drowned by the people's spit. Li Qitian said with a face full of concern. It's fine. We are brothers. Aren't you treating me as an outsider by saying this? This official doesn't dare. Pang Xiao bowed his head respectfully. Qin Yining used his other sleeve to wipe away his tears and curtsied. Your Majesty, this official's wife has a presumptuous request. Wang Ye's body is weak and his situation is worrying. This official's wife would like to ask Your Majesty to allow Wang Yi to temporarily return to his residence to recuperate. When he gets better, he can enter the palace to report on his work. Is this possible? As soon as Qin Yining finished speaking, Pang Zhao's tall body swayed. Qin Yining almost couldn't support himself. The people in the crowd exclaimed again. If there weren't so many people present, Li Qitian really wanted to strangle this cunning woman to death. She only made this request because she thought that he, as the son of heaven, still needed face. Pang Zhishi wasn't a good person either. She was taking advantage of him because he couldn't fall out with her. However, for the sake of his reputation, Li Qitian could only nod and agree. He also had to add, I will send the imperial physician to the Wang estate to treat Zhishi later. Many thanks for Your Majesty's sympathy. Qin Yining once again curtsied respectfully. She turned and supported Pang Xiao with Huzi and the others to the horse carriage at the corner of the street. The people spontaneously opened up a path for them. Qin Yining helped Pang Xiao into the carriage first. Then, she stepped on the wooden stool and got into the carriage. The moment she put down the curtain, her gaze inadvertently met with Lu Heng's. Lu Heng's gaze was as warm and gentle as before. However, that emotion was only revealed for a moment before he returned to his indifferent appearance. The curtain was completely put down, blocking the view of the people outside the carriage. The Jinghu Wei followed behind the carriage and drove all the way to the Wang estate. As for the people at the back of the crowd, they spontaneously followed behind the carriage and sent Wang Yi back to the Wang estate in a grandiose manner. Only those who were close to the emperor and kneeling on the ground couldn't move. They could only lower their heads. Li Qitian got onto the carriage with a smile on his face and ordered, return to the palace. Your Majesty sets off. Long live the emperor! Long live the emperor! Long live the emperor! The people knelt on the ground and respectfully sent them off. Li Qitian's imperial carriage came to personally welcome Pang Xiao, but in the end, it didn't receive her. It was a waste of time and caused people to talk about her behind her back for so long. Li Qitian, who was sitting on the carriage, was so angry that his body trembled. The people who followed Pang Zhao's carriage back to the Wang estate couldn't help but sigh when they saw the ruined courtyard walls and gates of the Wang estate. This was the Wang estate? It was poles apart from the splendid image of the Wang estate in their hearts. Wang Yi was fighting a war outside, living in the open, and risking his life. When he returned to the capital, his residence was only a little bigger, but it wasn't much better than the people's homes. After watching Wang Yi enter the Wang estate, Ji Yun followed Qin Yining's instructions and went to the gate to thank the people and ask them to disperse. When the gate to the Wang estate was completely closed, sighs could be heard from the crowd. Because they had just seen the emperor, no matter how far they were or whether they saw Li Qitian's appearance clearly, everyone tacitly didn't dare to talk about it. It was just that everyone more or less felt injustice for Pang Xiao in their hearts. A great hero had his entire family killed and fallen to such a state. At first, Your Majesty only arranged for a eunuch to deliver the decree. Perhaps because of public opinion, he had no choice but to personally come out to welcome her. Your Majesty treated a meritorious official too unfairly. Some people thought of the original Marquis Dinghua Jiziyu, the current Marquis Dinghua. I heard that Prince Consort Ji only has a noble title now and doesn't have an official position. When these words were said, it caused many people to sigh. In the Wang estate, Xie Yu, Su Weiji, Hu Zi, and Jing Hu Wei had already been arranged by Ji Yun to rest in the outer courtyard. Qin Yining and Pang Xiao went to the main building of the second courtyard. Everyone didn't speak along the way. When they entered the room, Bing Tang brought people to serve tea and snacks, and then stood guard outside the door. Pang Xiao looked at the clean and tidy furnishings in the room. Compared to the dilapidated scene they saw when they returned to the Wang estate, it was like the difference between heaven and earth. He relaxed and lay on the warm Kong bed by the window. We're finally home. Hee, my wife is so smart. He stretched out his large hand and pulled Qin Yining into his embrace. Qin Yining leaned against Pang Xiao's chest and said with a smile, "If I didn't appear quickly, he would be so angry. If he brought you into the palace, I'm afraid he would think of ways to punish you. I won't let you fall into his hands alone." She had been locked up in the palace, isolated and without help. That kind of feeling was simply helpless. If Pang Xiao was captured by Li Qitian in the wrong place, wouldn't she, who was outside the palace, be unable to do anything? Pang Xiao patted her thin shoulder with his large hand and said jokingly, "Don't tell me I can't go to court. You can claim to be sick." Qin Yining sat up straight, and a strand of her long hair fell over her shoulder. What a good opportunity. Everyone saw that you were sick. You can claim to be sick and not go to court. Even if you go in the future, the limelight will have passed. Moreover, there's so many people in court. He won't have the chance to play dirty tricks on you. What if he accuses me? Pang Xiao asked with a smile. Qin Yining's beautiful eyes turned craftily. Actually, some things happened after I returned to the capital. When I entered the city that day, I happened to meet the 9th young master of Duke Chang's Fu. Before Qin Yining could finish speaking, the sound of Bing Tang came from outside. "Wang Fei, Chief Lu is here." Qin Yining stilled and hurriedly pressed Pang Xiao to lie down. She used ginger juice to smoke her eyes, and her tears flowed down again. "Quickly invite Chief Lu in," Qin Yining said to the outside with her nose wrinkled. Pang Xiao frowned in disapproval. "Use less next time. It's so spicy." Qin Yining took the time to stick out her tongue at Pang Xiao and make a face. Pang Xiao was so amused that he almost burst out laughing. But when he heard the footsteps outside approaching, he had to use all his strength to suppress it. In his heart, he had already pressed his cute sister into his arms and kissed her tens of thousands of times. Chapter 9:12. Qin Yining said politely, "Thank you for your trouble, Magistrate Lu. Wang Fei is too polite. This is this lowly official's duty." Magistrate Lu moved forward and took out a pulse pillow. He half knelt next to the heated Kong by the window and carefully checked Pang Xiao's pulse. He placed 3 fingers on the ruler. After examining his hands with great concentration, he couldn't help but sigh inwardly. Although Prince Zhongshuan's body had old injuries, He had clearly been carefully nursed back to health. Now he was full of energy and vigor. He was a man who was almost 50 years old, but his body was comparable to a youth in his early 20s. How could he faint? Then there was only one reason for fainting, and that was that Wang Yi wanted to faint. Magistrate Liu was skilled in medicine, but there were countless skilled people in the Imperial Academy of Medicine. He had been in the Imperial Academy of Medicine for many years. To be able to reach the position of magistrate of the Imperial Academy of Medicine, he relied not only on his medical skills, but also on his smooth and sly conduct. His Highness has overworked himself. Deputy Hospital Head Liu probed implicitly. Pang Xiao nodded with a slight smile and said, weakly, there was heavy snow on the road back to the capital. The road was difficult to travel. This king was anxious to return home, so he had to eat and sleep in the open on the road. Magistrate Liu immediately nodded. That's right. Wang Yi's old injuries flared up when he encountered the extremely cold weather and the bumpy road. However, this isn't a major cause. If he properly nursed himself back to health, it would take at least 3 to 5 days and at most 3 to 5 months to get better. Qin Yining almost laughed when he heard this. Magistrate Liu was truly a wonderful person. The difference between 3 to 5 days and 3 to 5 months was great. There were many things that could be done. These words gave Pang Xiao face, could deal with your majesty, and also sold Pang Xiao's favor. It wouldn't infuriate the emperor and implicate him, and Pang Xiao definitely wouldn't expose him. It was truly a win-win situation. Many thanks to Magistrate Liu. Please go outside and write a prescription. Qin Yining wiped his tears and instructed Ji Yun to prepare a brush and ink. He also gave Chief Deputy Liu a big red envelope. Deputy Chief Liu accepted it with a smile. He gave a few more words of advice before leaving the prince's residence to report back to the palace. Seeing that he had left, Pang Xiao lay on the bed for a while longer. Then she jumped up and walked briskly to the door to take a look. She turned around and pulled Qin Yining's hand to sit on the heated Kong bed. It's cold outside. Look at how cold your hands are. Are they frozen? Not bad. Qin Yining smiled and sat next to Pang Xiao. Pang Xiao looked at her red and swollen eyes and said, Don't use such thick ginger juice next time. What if it's bad for your eyes? It's fine. I didn't use my sleeve to wipe my eyes. I was afraid that if I cried, it wouldn't be real enough and people would see through me. Wouldn't all my efforts be in vain? Pang Xiao sighed and said, When my sister frowns, my heart clenches for a long time. Making you cry is worse than being stabbed with a knife. His large hand pulled Qin Yining into his embrace and kissed her forehead lovingly. In the future, when everything is over, I definitely won't let you cry. Qin Yining couldn't help but smile, but the corners of her eyes were a bit moist. Perhaps the ginger juice on her sleeve was too strong. All right, I cry when I'm happy. I cry when I'm unhappy. It's not something you can control. You don't know how many people envy me for being able to marry such a great hero like you. You understand me, love me, respect me, and give me enough space to display my abilities. This is something that many men can't do for their wives. I'm especially satisfied to be with you, so you really don't have to feel any psychological burden. Sister, Pang Xiao's throat was dry for a moment. His Adam's apple bobbed up and down. After a long time, he smiled and said, All right, you're my wife. We'll be in the same boat through thick and thin. No matter how many problems there are in the future, we'll solve them together. Although the situation is tense now, there will be a day when I can let you live a peaceful and comfortable life. Let's first suffer before the sweetness. That's right. Let's first suffer before the sweetness. There's a lifetime of happiness waiting for us to enjoy. Qin Yining smiled and leaned on Pang Xiao's shoulder. After some thought, she recounted how she was offended by Duke Chang's 9th young master, how she talked to Duke Chong, and how she beat him with a plank before sending him back. Pang Xiao said in shock, So it's true? When my men were in the city looking for information, they found out about this. However, I thought that the rumors outside might not be true. Our family has always been at the center of the storm, so it's normal for people to spread rumors behind our backs. I didn't expect it to be true. Qin Yining raised her eyebrows. Did I spoil your plans by doing this? Of course not. Pang Xiao touched her face and said with a smile, You did very well. If I was here, I'm afraid I would beat him even harder. At the end, the coldness in Pang Xiao's eyes could not be concealed. Shang Jihua dared to flirt with his wife. It was already a blessing from the heavens that Shang Jihua's life was not taken. Qin Yining leaned close to her ear and told Pang Xiao his plan in detail. Pang Xiao blinked. She thought about how she cooperated with Qin Yining today and the reactions of the people in the city. Then she thought about Qin Yining's arrangements. She could not help but smile dotingly and joyfully. She pinched the tip of her nose with her fingers. You naughty girl. Now someone is going to cry because of your tricks. Didn't I do it for you? If you don't like it, I don't have to continue. Qin Yining pretended to be proud as she said. Pang Xiao loved this look of hers. He hugged her waist and laughed. How could I bear to do that? All right, we'll do as you say. We've had a hard time eating and sleeping in the open all the way back to the capital. During this time, I'll claim that I'm sick. Let's have a good rest at home. He leaned close to Qin Yining's ear and whispered, Let's have a few days of shamelessness. Originally, the topic was very serious. Who would have thought that Pang Xiao would change it in the end? Qin Yining's ears turned red. She punched his chest unhappily. You lecher. Why didn't I find out earlier that you were like this? Pang Xiao grabbed her soft hand and rubbed the back of her hand with his thumb. Who said that? When we first met, I acted like a hooligan. Have you forgotten? Qin Yining couldn't help but blush when she recalled how this guy chased after her shirtless in the military camp and even dared to say that she was his woman. However, they were almost an old married couple now. Thinking back to those days, although there were times when they were embarrassed, most of them were warm and sweet. Pang Xiao saw Qin Yining's bashful appearance, and his heart was already racing. He pulled her hand and coaxed her to talk. At this time, Li Qitian was in the imperial study listening to Deputy Chief Lu's report with a gloomy expression. You mean to say that Prince Zhongshuan's old illness really has relapsed? Deputy Chief Lu was nervous. However, based on his judgment and understanding of your majesty, his words would definitely pass. Therefore, Deputy Chief Lu calmly nodded and said, replying to your majesty, that is indeed the case. Prince Zhongshuan has many large and small injuries on his body. When he returned to the capital this time, he was caught up in the heavy snow. The weather was cold and the ground was frozen. The cold penetrated his bones and his old injuries relapsed. When Li Qitian heard this, his heart inexplicably felt much better. He slowly nodded and said, We will leave Prince Zhongshuan's health to you. You must do your best. Deputy Chief Lu lowered his head and respectfully said yes. Although he could vaguely sense that your majesty's words were unusual, he didn't want to get involved in these matters. He only pretended not to understand. Li Qitian casually waved his hand. Deputy Chief Lu hurriedly bowed and withdrew. Li Qitian's expression was gloomy. He crossed his legs and leaned against the arm of the Polonio wooden chair. His fingertips tapped his knees in a neither fast nor slow manner. When Pang Xiao returned to the capital today, everything that had happened flashed through his mind. In the end, Li Qitian could conclude that he had long planned this. He had used the people's public opinion to force him to be a wise ruler and not punish a meritorious official. Today, he had left the palace to welcome Pang Xiao. If he didn't go, it would prove that he mistreated a meritorious official. If he went, it would instead prove that Pang Xiao was a meritorious official. Pang Xiao's actions in the south were indeed beneficial to the court, but who could say that Pang Xiao's actions were not for his own sake? For example, when Pang Xiao had used the south to threaten him, he had no choice but to give up on the idea of killing Qin Yining. However, no one else knew about these secret confrontations. The officials didn't know, and the people didn't know. Li Qitian had rarely suffered losses. Now that he thought about it carefully, most of the losses he had suffered were related to Pang Xiao. However, this time, it seemed that he would have to swallow this loss. Li Qitian tightly pursed his lips, but his eyes narrowed due to the high-speed operation of his brain. Pang Xiao and Qin Yining really did spend a few days shamelessly at home. Although they didn't go out to play, their living conditions weren't much different from when they first went to the Liu family. The two read books together or discussed what to do next. When they had nothing to do, they would casually play a game. In the end, there was even a bet to be made. After hearing Your Majesty's orders, Deputy Chief Liu would come to the Fu the next day to take the pulse. The records on the pulse were exactly as Pang Xiao had shown. It had to be said that Deputy Chief Liu was really a smooth and sly person. This way, he could report on his own, not implicate his family, and not offend anyone. As a result, time quickly passed, and it was the day of the court assembly. As usual, Pang Xiao claimed that he was sick and couldn't go to court. However, at the court assembly, something happened that shocked the officials. The Duke of Changhua, Shang Chuan, came out of his office and knelt to impeach Prince Zhongshuan. Your Majesty, when Prince Zhongshuan returned to the capital, he gathered thousands of people and almost caused chaos in the city. The military department of the 5 cities had no choice but to send more people. As a result, there were many empty patrols in the city. If something big happened because of this, wouldn't people laugh at the security of the capital? As an important official in the court, Prince Zhongshuan is deeply trusted by Your Majesty. Acting so recklessly and disrupting the order of the capital is already a heinous crime. When Your Majesty personally came out of the palace to welcome him, he still lost his composure in front of the emperor. This is simply disrespectful. Prince Zhongshuan is an important official and should be an example for the other officials. His actions are truly unforgivable. Your Majesty, please punish him for a serious crime. The Duke of Changhua, Shang Chuan, was an old official from Beiji. He had always been low-key and wouldn't cause trouble. He was famous for being an easygoing person. However, today he stood out to impeach Pang Xiao. This really surprised all the civil and military officials in the court. However, when they thought of the rumors flying around the city a few days ago, some people said that Pang Xiao and the Duke of Changhua were irreconcilable enemies. Chapter 9:13. Li Qitian's face was as calm as water, not saying anything. However, Du Chang had clearly come prepared. Pang Xiao had become a despicable person in his words. However, when Changhua Gong impeached Pang Xiao, the content of his impeachment was nothing serious. Even if he was convicted, he could turn a blind eye to it. Obviously, it was not as shocking as the 10 major crimes that Li Qitian fabricated when he came prepared. Just as Duke Chang spoke, an imperial censor came out. Ban Xing bowed and added with righteous indignation, Your Majesty, Prince Zhongshuan was not only arrogant and disrupted the order of the capital. This official learned that it was already late at night when Prince Zhongshuan's consort returned to the capital. She did not observe the curfew and forced the city gate officials to open the city gates to let her in. Prince Zhongshuan's consort relied on nothing more than Prince Zhongshuan. For a woman to be so arrogant, it can be seen how Prince Zhongshuan normally is. When one person spoke, many imperial censors immediately came out to echo. For a moment, the imperial court was in chaos. Everyone was filled with anger, full of righteous indignation, as if Pang Xiao had committed the most heinous crime of raping and pillaging. Li Qitian's forehead was already vaguely bulging with veins. However, under the imperial court, according to etiquette, the officials could not raise their heads to look directly at the emperor's face. Therefore, these people continued to impeach without understanding. Li Qitian gritted his teeth in hatred. Of all the times to impeach, they chose this time to impeach. Right now, the public opinion in the capital was flourishing. Could he punish Pang Xiao? If he punished her, wouldn't it give people a reason to criticize him and make people think that he, the Son of Heaven, treated a meritorious official harshly? However, if he didn't punish her, first, there was such a good opportunity in front of him. Second, it was equivalent to indirectly exonerating Pang Xiao. In the future, if he wanted to use these reasons to impeach Pang Xiao, it would be slapping his own face. No matter how he thought about it, he was the one who was at a disadvantage. He didn't have a loyal subject who could understand his intentions. What was the point of having these things that were only pleasing to the eye, but not to the eye? Li Qitian waited for Minister Du to finish speaking before he suppressed his anger and said coldly, "This matter needs to be investigated." Xiong Jin Shui was standing closest to the emperor, so he naturally saw Li Qitian's twitching mouth and the bulging blue veins on his forehead. Fearing that your majesty would be affected by the dragon power, Xiong Jin Shui hurriedly stepped forward and shouted while the officials were still in shock at the emperor's reaction. "Submit a memorial if you have one. Withdraw if you don't." This meant that the emperor's pending investigation was enough to end the impeachment. Li Qitian's reaction was out of everyone's expectations, but no one dared to say anything at this time. Chang Wugong could only tactfully retreat for the time being. Qin Yining and Peng Xiao soon heard about what happened in the imperial court. "Your Majesty must be in a bad mood right now." "That's right. He has long wanted to punish me for my crimes, but he has never succeeded. Earlier, when he ordered people to impeach me, the old officials of Beiji, represented by Chang Wugong, all held a wait-and-see attitude. Now that public opinion is at its peak, it's the most inappropriate time to impeach me. Yet it happened here." Qin Yining couldn't help but laugh when he heard this. Li Qitian must be dying of anger right now. "Wang Yi." "Yes, Magistrate Liu is here." Ji Yun, who was outside the door, reported. Peng Xiao smiled, took off his soft boots, and got on the heated Kong bed. Qin Yining pulled a brocade blanket over him and covered him with it, then took a dark purple soft pillow for him to lean on. Magistrate Liu entered the room and first greeted him with proper etiquette. Then, he respectfully went forward to take his pulse as a matter of routine. If it was at the beginning, Peng Xiao would still be a little weak from the long journey. Now that he had recuperated, he was even more energetic. Magistrate Liu couldn't help but secretly rejoice that your Majesty only arranged for him to treat Wang Yi. If he occasionally sent someone to check on him, wouldn't he be exposed? Your Majesty would probably skin him alive. Wang Yi's body. Magistrate Liu hesitantly looked up at Peng Xiao. Peng Xiao covered his mouth and coughed twice. Magistrate Liu immediately understood and said, "Wang Yi's body hasn't fully recovered, and his old injuries won't recover in a day or two. Please don't overwork Wang Yi and take care of himself." Peng Xiao nodded. Qin Yining worriedly asked, "Magistrate Liu, please consider the prescription carefully. Is Wang Yi all right?" Magistrate Liu said calmly, "Wang Yi is fine, but you still need to follow this humble one's prescription." Qin Yining nodded and politely escorted Magistrate Liu out to write the prescription. After he left, the husband and wife looked at each other and burst into laughter. Just as the two were discussing what to eat for dinner, there was a sudden rush of footsteps outside the door. Bing Tang quickly walked in and said, "Wang Yi, Wang Fei, Duke Ding has come to visit." Alon? Peng Xiao sat up in surprise. In the few days he had been back, no one had come to visit, whether it was his former colleagues or comrades. The Wang Fu was deserted, and he deliberately didn't renovate the residence. If it wasn't for the occasional few servants walking around, the Wang Fu would be no different from a haunted house. He didn't expect that the first person to come, and the only one who dared to come, was still Ji Ziyu. Qin Yining said with emotion, "At that time, Imperial Censor Dai Lin took advantage of the morning hall in our house to bring people to block the door and cause trouble. If Duke Ding hadn't arrived in time, who knows what would have happened? Now that you are sick, and he is the first one to come, we must not disappoint him." Peng Xiao nodded and stood up to greet him with Qin Yining. Not long after, he saw Ji Ziyu, who was tall and beautiful but cold as ice, wearing a light blue shirt with arrow sleeves and a cloak with a gray mouse collar on his shoulder, walking toward him. "Alon." Peng Xiao smiled and walked down the steps to greet him. When Ji Ziyu saw Peng Xiao, a smile appeared on his originally expressionless handsome face. The corners of his lips curled up slightly. "Jishi." He looked at Peng Xiao from head to toe. "Are you feeling better?" "I'm fine." Peng Xiao held Ji Ziyu's wrist and said with a smile, "We brothers haven't seen each other for a long time. How have you been?" Ji Ziyu looked at Peng Xiao with a smile, then nodded at Qin Yining and followed him up the steps into the main room. Qin Yining smiled and went to prepare tea and refreshments. He left the room for the two brothers to catch up. Ji Ziyu took off his cloak and threw it on a chair. He and Pang Xiao sat on either side of the Kong table to warm the Kong. Pang Xiao held the pot and poured a cup of tea for Ji Ziyu. Have you been in the capital all this time? Has your majesty arranged any other tasks for you? Ji Ziyu picked up the teacup and took a sip. He shook his head and said no, but it doesn't matter. The way things are now is good. You, on the other hand. Ji Ziyu looked at Pang Xiao's rosy cheeks and high-spirited appearance. He couldn't help but laugh. It seems that your old illness isn't very serious. You should stay in the Fu to recuperate. Don't go out to stroll around. If your majesty sees your rosy cheeks, he'll be so angry that he'll fall ill. It was rare for Ji Ziyu, a man of few words, to say so many teasing words in one breath. Pang Xiao laughed heartily and said, Ji Lan, you're still the same after not seeing you for so long. Ji Ziyu saw that Pang Xiao was so cheerful. He originally wanted to comfort Pang Xiao, but didn't say anything. He only asked, You should know that Shang Chuan led a group of imperial censors to impeach you, right? Yes, I already know. Pang Xiao didn't hide the fact that he always paid attention to the news of the imperial court. Ji Ziyu said, You should also take precautions early. Your majesty hasn't done anything now, but it doesn't mean that he won't do anything in the future. I heard that you and Shang Chuan had some irreconcilable enmity in the past. Let's start from the bottom. Even when we attacked Beiji, we did it according to official business. We never did anything excessive. How could we have any enmity with Shang Chuan? Pang Xiao laughed. Even if there was enmity in the past, Dezhou's imperial court has been established for 8 years. No matter how many enmities there are, they can't win against time. Now that everyone is living a stable life, why would he look for trouble for no reason? Pang Xiao thought for a while, then leaned closer to Ji Ziyu and whispered, Don't worry, I have my own plans. Seeing Pang Xiao's confident look, Ji Ziyu's worried heart relaxed a little. Then, he said in realization, I knew it. Your wife isn't a domineering and impulsive person. On the contrary, she is very cautious. She actually sent Shang Jihua back with a plank. There must be something else going on. When Pang Xiao heard Ji Ziyu's evaluation of Qin Yining, he felt relieved and laughed again. Ji Ziyu was also affected by Pang Xiao's laughter. He said with a smile, Forget it. Since you have your own plans, I won't ask anymore. If there's anything you want to do, just order someone to inform me. I have nothing to do at home anyway. Pang Xiao's gaze deepened. So you could do anything? Ji Ziyu was stunned for a moment, then smiled. Of course. His words seemed to have made some kind of promise. Pang Xiao and Ji Ziyu looked at each other and smiled. The two of them then talked about their lives after they parted. Although they didn't directly talk about politics, it was obvious that their opinions were still the same as before. Qin Yining had already prepared a table of food and came over to invite the two of them to take a seat. He didn't stay for long and casually ate 2 mouthfuls. Then, he excused himself and left, leaving the two of them alone. Ji Ziyu and Pang Xiao didn't pay attention to the rule of not talking while eating. They chatted while eating. How are you going to deal with your impeachment today? Without waiting for Pang Xiao's reply, Ji Ziyu sneered again. Those imperial censors are like mad dogs. They're useless, but they don't let go of others. While you're fighting on the battlefield and sweating for the country, they're still enjoying themselves in the land of women. Now, they want to get rid of you after you've outlived your usefulness. These words weren't just directed at the imperial censors, but also at Li Qitian. Pang Xiao patted Ji Ziyu's shoulder comfortingly and filled his wine cup. Let's not talk about these troublesome matters. If they want to impeach me, then let them. Your Majesty won't immediately sentence me to death anyway. As long as I'm alive, there's nothing I can't overcome. As he spoke, he clinked his cup with Ji Ziyu. The two of them happily drank their cups. Pang Xiao then continued, I plan to wait and see. I want to see what the people in the court think about this matter. It's rare to have such a good opportunity to test real gold. You plan to pretend to compromise first? Yes. Pang Xiao smiled. Even a man like me faints. It's not that difficult to admit defeat. Ji Ziyu smiled. Don't say that. When I heard that you fainted, it really gave me a fright. We've suffered injuries and lost a lot of blood over the years. If some old illness relapses, it won't be a joke. You and I aren't teenagers anymore. Now that we're standing up, we should also think about recuperating. Chapter 9:14. Jiziyu smiled and glared at Pang Xiao. He also felt that it was very funny. We haven't seen each other for a long time. Now that I see you, I can't help but talk a lot. Pang Xiao couldn't help but sigh. Jiziyu's life was different from his. Even when he and Qin Yining were forced to separate, he still cared about each other in his heart. He knew that Qin Yining was silently doing things for him. Even if he did things, he had a direction and goal to strive for. But Jiziyu wasn't as lucky as him. Pang Xiao said, "If you have time, come and drink with me in the future. If you can't go through the front door, you can also climb over the wall. I'll go back and tell the guards not to stop you even if they see you climbing over the wall. You, on the other hand, don't even let people go through the front door when you ask them to drink. Hey, why are you so good at distorting people?" The two brothers joked with each other. This meal lasted until midnight. When Jiziyu said goodbye, Pang Xiao thought for a while and said, "Why don't you practice climbing over the wall today? Li Qiqian must have arranged spies outside the prince's mansion." Jiziyu had been here for so long. If he swaggered out now, he was afraid that the spies would return to Li Qiqian. They were both generals and Li Qiqian's sworn brothers. They had been together for so long. What exactly did they discuss? Pang Xiao didn't want Li Qiqian to misunderstand Jiziyu. In case they fell out one day, he didn't want Jiziyu to be implicated for no reason. Jiziyu immediately understood what Pang Xiao was thinking. "I drank a lot today. It's not good for me to climb over the wall. I'll go through the front door." Pang Xiao was choked by Jiziyu's words. He pulled his sleeve and said, "You should listen to me." "No need. I know you mean well." Jiziyu smiled. "It's okay. I'll go now. Next time I want to climb, I'll come to your house's wall." Pang Xiao was amused by Jiziyu. He laughed. Since Jiziyu didn't care, he didn't have any interest in acting like a girl. He smiled and walked him to the front door. Jiziyu stopped him. "Go back and take care of yourself." Pang Xiao nodded in agreement when he saw that Jiziyu had reverted to his usual ice-cold appearance. He covered his mouth and coughed twice before he said, "Then, I won't see you out. Hold on." The two bids teet. Pang Xiao watched Jiziyu walk away with large strides. Only then did he return to the main room. As soon as Jiziyu left the palace, someone immediately reported to Li Qiqian. Li Qiqian was about to go to bed. He sneered and sent the spies away. Li Qiqian didn't feel sleepy at all. He put on his dragon robe and paced back and forth on the floor. He didn't rest until midnight. What happened in the imperial court naturally didn't reach the ears of the common people. However, Duke Changhua didn't seem to be satisfied with his first failed impeachment. The next day, he impeached Pang Xiao again. The content of the impeachment was the same as last time. The imperial censors were the same as last time. The high and mighty emperor even felt that they had memorized the articles in private. Li Qiqian still couldn't convict Pang Xiao. He said that it would be investigated. At this time, most of the people in the imperial court were watching Her Majesty and Prince Zhongshuan's attitude to make the best judgment. The news of Pang Xiao being impeached twice somehow spread throughout the streets and alleys of the capital city. Li Qiqian was originally angry that Pang Xiao delayed his return to the capital because public opinion couldn't convict him. Now that he was being impeached twice, even if he couldn't agree, he could sit on the mountain and watch the tigers fight. He was enjoying watching the show. However, he didn't expect this matter to spread. There were many common people who went to greet Pang Xiao and saw him faint. Pang Xiao, this great hero, was covered with sadness. It wasn't just the common people. Pang Xiao's subordinates and some of his former subordinates, including the Tiger Army, were all sighing for Pang Xiao. Now that such a thing had happened, the displeasure in the hearts of the people who were already protesting for Pang Xiao increased by a few levels. Many imperial censors in the imperial court didn't care about what the common people were saying. They were more concerned about Pang Xiao's reaction. Although Pang Xiao claimed to be ill and hadn't participated in the imperial court for a long time, They didn't believe that Pang Xiao didn't know anything about the outside world. He knew his situation, but he still refused to say anything. Could it be that he was afraid? Many people felt that Pang Xiao was learning to lower his head and keep a low profile. He probably also felt the danger of being overshadowed by his achievements. So he took advantage of the situation before Your Majesty made a move. He wasn't the only one with such thoughts. Pang Xiao used to be a domineering figure, but now he seemed to be a different person. He just lay in his residence all day to recuperate. Even if someone made trouble for him, he didn't care. This way of doing things was completely different from the tough person he used to be. It was like he was a different person. It could be seen that even a great hero had to lower his head in front of imperial power. The imperial censors seemed to have been injected with chicken blood. In their eyes, Pang Xiao's silence was evidence that he had admitted defeat. The more Pang Xiao didn't say anything, the louder their voices of impeachment in the imperial court. The content of the impeachment was varied. They even mentioned that Pang Xiao had trampled on the farmers' fields when he led the Tiger Army to attack the Yin dynasty in the early years. Some even described Pang Xiao as a bully who did all kinds of evil. In these people's words, Pang Xiao went from being a hero who made great contributions to the founding of the Dazhou dynasty to a bandit leader who did all kinds of evil in order to fill his own pockets. Li Qiqian could only listen to the impeachment, but couldn't nod his head. These voices of impeachment caused some people to be dissatisfied. Most of these people were civil officials and generals. Most of them had worked with Pang Xiao or were Pang Xiao's former subordinates. They knew Pang Xiao's character and admired his actions. They didn't expect that he would end up like this after serving the country wholeheartedly. Not only was he impeached so miserably, Your Majesty didn't even stop these rascals from talking nonsense. No matter how thick a towering tree was, it couldn't withstand being chewed by these vermin all day long. No matter how good a person's reputation was, it couldn't withstand public criticism. Many people felt bitterly disappointed. They even wondered if they would end up in the same situation one day. Li Qiqian only wanted to see Pang Xiao make a fool of himself and neglected this point. Wang Yi, you haven't recovered yet, but those mad dogs are already barking. Brothers, we really feel indignant for you. Several of Pang Xiao's former subordinates from the Tiger Army came to visit him. Looking at Pang Xiao's half-new, sky-blue wide-sleeved gown, he looked even more like a scholar. He was so weak that he didn't look like the awe-inspiring person he had on the battlefield. They felt even sadder. When Wang Yi led us to kill the enemy, those shameless things were still in their women's beds. Now, they're just taking advantage of Wang Yi's silence and the fact that you don't have military power. Your Majesty is the same. You just let those people do whatever they want. Pang Xiao smiled and waved his hand to stop this topic from continuing. Don't talk about national affairs, and don't talk about Your Majesty. Pang Xiao's gentle appearance was a sharp contrast to his domineering appearance in the past. In these people's eyes, Pang Xiao was obviously suppressed by Your Majesty and couldn't even raise his head. Even his pride was almost worn away. When they left Wang Yi's residence, everyone's eyes were red with depression. Motherfucker, what the hell is this? Those who are loyal to the country are not rewarded well. Look at Wang Yi's food, clothing, and shelter now. Look at how quiet Wang Yi's residence is. His family is almost extinct. Wang Yi's illness is probably related to his family's tragic death. Wang Yi's twins sigh, what a pity. Everyone's discussion wasn't limited to a small circle. Soon, such discussions spread from Pang Xiao's former subordinates and loyal followers to him, and gradually spread among the common people. The image of Pang Xiao as a tragic hero was once again deeply etched in everyone's minds. Su Weiji and Xie Yu both tried to persuade Pang Xiao. Wang Yi's current situation is worrying. It's better to make early plans. Things have already gotten to this point. I'm afraid that wavering will hurt your reputation. That's right, Wang Yi. Looking at Your Majesty's actions, regardless of what Wang Yi is like, this old man feels bitterly disappointed. If he really is a heroic ruler who can stabilize the country, why would he guard against someone who has never been disloyal to him? To this extent, he's unwilling to give him a quick death. It wasn't just Xie Yu and Su Weiji who were indirectly persuading Pang Xiao to make a decision. Even the Jinghu Wei were on high alert, guarding Pang Xiao and Qin Yining's residence like an iron bucket. Tang Xiao's face was tense these days. She gathered with Huzi to discuss the defense and layout of the residence. After Pang Xiao and Qin Yining had lunch, they strolled around the Dao courtyard. Tang Xiao and Huzi immediately brought people to follow them, looking nervous as if they were preparing for battle. Pang Xiao smiled and said, "Why are you so nervous? This is our own home. There's no need to be like this, right?" However, Tang Xiao's delicate face was tense. She frowned and said, replying to Wang Yi, "Even if we're in the residence, we can't let our guard down. If someone can impeach Wang Yi behind his back, there's a possibility that someone will order someone to assassinate Wang Yi. Even in Beijing, it's not completely peaceful now." Qin Yining, Bing Tang, and Ji Yin looked at each other and didn't say anything. Qin Yining was very satisfied with this result. It seemed that after the propaganda of the tragic hero, Pang Zhao's grievances had been magnified countless times in everyone's hearts. The people close to him were even more aggrieved for Pang Xiao. However, they were in the residence of the emperor, so some words couldn't be said directly. This was the purpose of Qin Yining's plan. She wanted to give Pang Xiao a good reputation and establish a good image. No matter how things developed in the future, no matter what the final result was, she would not allow Pang Xiao to be scolded. Just as the servants and Jinghu Wei in the residence were holding their breaths, and many people outside the residence were complaining for Prince Zhongshuan, who was recuperating, an invitation was sent to Prince Zhongshuan's residence by the steward of Zhong Yiba's residence. When Qin Yining heard that someone from the Liu family had come, she personally went to the front hall. Chapter 9:15. Qin Yining was a little surprised. He didn't expect Lu Heng to remarry at this time. However, it was only a matter of time before Lu Heng remarried. At his age, he lacked a matriarch who could manage the household and maintain relationships with the upper-class women. That position naturally couldn't remain empty. It had to be said that Lu Heng was finally willing to give up his feelings for her and remarry. Qin Yining heaved a sigh of relief in his heart. She wasn't a blockhead. Lu Heng had been so direct when facing her later on. As a married woman, she sometimes felt awkward when she saw Lu Heng. Now, with Lu Heng's remarriage, the past would turn a page. So it's a joyous occasion for the estate. Qin Yining put down the wedding invitation and said with a smile, "Originally, Wang Yi and I should be present at Zhong Yiba's wedding. However, I'm sure you know about our family situation. Now that Wang Yi is sick in bed and the two of us are in mourning, it's really inappropriate for us to attend the wedding on such a good day. Please explain to Zhong Yiba on our behalf and thank Uncle for his kindness on our behalf. Wang Yi and I will definitely meticulously prepare a generous gift to congratulate Uncle and his newly wedded wife for 100 years of bliss." When the steward heard this, he nodded understandingly and bowed. "Yes, this lowly one will definitely pass on your message." Qin Yining rewarded the steward with a big red envelope and ordered someone to see the guests out. After the steward left, Qin Yining returned to his room with the wedding invitation. He pulled up Pang Xiao, who was lying on the heated Kong and reading a military book while eating melon seeds. "What does Lu Heng want to do?" Pang Xiao tossed the book aside and pulled Qin Yining into his arms to sit down. His entire body was filled with hostility and vigilance. It was as if it was about to materialize. Qin Yining found it funny and handed the wedding invitation to him. "Zhong Yiba is remarrying." Pang Xiao was startled, and the corner of her mouth could not help but raise. "Is that so?" He unfolded the wedding invitation and looked at it carefully. Finally, his fingertips landed on the two words "bien" at the end. Qin Yining leaned on Pang Zhao's shoulder and looked at the wedding invitation. He asked, "Do you know who this bien is?" Pang Xiao thought about it carefully. There is no official in the imperial court who can talk about marriage with Zhong Yiba's Liu family and who has this surname. However, as far as I know, Your Majesty has a concubine by his side. Her surname seems to be Bien. Her father used to be a county magistrate in the Northern Ji dynasty. Now, he has retired. However, It is said that the Bien family's financial resources should not be underestimated. Qin Yining thought of Lu Heng and couldn't help but frown slightly. So, this is 99% likely to be a marriage of interest. Pang Xiao put down the wedding invitation and said, "How many people in the imperial court can be as lucky as me to marry the woman they love?" This was the truth, but it was also a straightforward statement of love. Qin Yining smiled and lightly punched Pang Xiao's shoulder. However, Pang Xiao pulled her white fingers close to his lips and kissed them. In the end, as if he was not satisfied, he gently bit her fingertips, causing a tingling sensation. Qin Yining's cheeks flushed. "Stop fooling around." "Okay, I won't fool around," he promised, but did not stop. "What did you say?" Qin Yining struggled for a while before pulling his hand away. He rolled his eyes at Pang Xiao and said, "We are both in mourning. How can we attend the wedding banquet?" "I think Zhong Yiba sent the wedding invitation out of courtesy. I told the steward that we will send the wedding gifts later. We won't be going." "Okay." Pang Xiao leaned against the large pillow, one hand hugging Qin Yining and the other hand behind her head. He clicked his tongue and said, "He is finally willing to remarry. Not bad." He seemed to heave a huge sigh of relief. Qin Yining naturally knew what he was thinking. He shook his head in amusement and did not say anything. Pang Xiao said, "I will prepare the wedding gifts later. You don't have to interfere." Knowing that he was still jealous, Qin Yining tactfully nodded and said, "It is good that you are willing to prepare the gifts. I will not interfere in the matters between you men. When the time comes, I will order someone to send in your name." Pang Xiao felt very happy and planted a loud kiss on Qin Yining's forehead. At Zhong Yiba's residence, Lu Heng received the wedding gifts from Prince Zhongshuan's residence. He looked at the rich contents of the gift list and threw it to the steward without interest. "Uncle, it seems that Prince Zhongshuan is—" Before the steward could finish his flattering words, he saw Lu Heng's expressionless face. For a moment, all the words were stuck in his throat. "You can leave." "Yes." The steward hurriedly retreated as though he had been pardoned. Lu Heng stood in front of the window of the study with his hands behind his back. The warm light of the lanterns hanging high outside the window could be faintly seen through the closed window. His hands behind his back clenched and unclenched, then clenched again. In the end, he sighed helplessly. There was no trace of her in the gift list. He was about to get married, but Qin Yining did not express anything. She only used her status as the mistress of the Wang Fu to thank the servant he arranged to send the wedding invitation. The wedding gifts were also given to him, but he could not see any of her intentions. In the past, when he did not remarry, there was still a glimmer of hope. Now that he was about to remarry, the hope was very slim. Lu Heng's unwillingness and struggle could not be shown in front of anyone. He could only hide all his frustrations in his heart. Bianshi was concubine Zhuang's younger cousin. Her background was not very high. In the eyes of the Lu family, she was not very noble. However, with the status of concubine Zhuang, who was currently favored, if he married Bianshi, Bien and Your Majesty would become relatives. He was the clan leader of the Lu family. He no longer had the right to be willful. Other than thinking for himself, he also had to consider the situation of the family. After his grandfather passed away, many things were out of his control. However, he also had more opportunities to show his strength. Right now, the Lu family was developing according to his plan. Tying themselves to the Son of Heaven was the only choice. He had already waited for Qin Yining for so long. He could not wait any longer. As for remarrying, he was no longer against it. However, ever since that glimpse in the restaurant that day, he had lost his soul. How could he find it again? He was not willing to accept not being able to obtain Qin Yining. Lu Heng was filled with sorrow. In front of others, he had to pretend to be happy. Every night, when it was quiet, only the cold lanterns would know of his unwillingness and resentment. The preparations for the wedding proceeded in an orderly manner. The patriarch of the Lu family was remarrying. Concubine Zhuang's cousin was getting married. No matter how one looked at it, this wedding could not be done half-heartedly. In a few days, the topic of conversation for the people in Jing finally changed from the treated hero to Zhong Yiba, who was about to get married. After this period of time, Li Qitian's thoughts were changing. Chang Guogong and the imperial censors participating in the Pang Shao had made him very happy. However, after thinking about it, he felt that this kind of participation was adding insult to injury. Originally, the people were saying that he, the emperor, was deliberately trying to murder a meritorious official. His hands and feet were tied because of this matter. Since he could not punish Pang Shao at this time, it was better to completely let this matter go. It was better than him standing at the heart of the storm. Now that there was Lu Heng's wedding, the people's attention was finally diverted. He did not have to worry about people saying that he was heartless and unjust behind his back. However, the development of the matter did not go as Li Qitian had expected. Chang Guogong actually took the lead in impeaching Pang Shao a few days later. This time, his words were so fierce that it was as if Pang Shao had dug up his family's ancestral grave. The public opinion that had just been suppressed once again flourished. Finally, Li Qitian could not help but pull a long face in the imperial court. It was not good for him to speak his mind, so he snorted at Duke Chang Guogong, then left the entire imperial court with a flick of his sleeves. Your Majesty's actions caused many people to discuss. Some people analyzed that Your Majesty was angry because Chang Guogong had repeatedly wronged Prince Zhongshuan. However, the majority of people felt that Your Majesty was angry at Prince Zhongshuan's innumerable evil deeds. In the period from February to March, the people had been discussing Pang Zhao's impeachment and Zhong Yiba's remarriage. On the 6th day of the 3rd month, Qin Yining was leisurely doing needlework with Bing Tang and Ji Yun. The new second-rank servant girl, Ziyuan, quickly walked in. She respectfully bowed and said crisply, "Wang Fei, the Countess of Anping has sent an invitation." Qin Yining smiled as she put down the embroidery. "Let me see." Ziyuan presented the invitation with both hands. On the invitation, the Countess of Anping asked if she was free this afternoon. Qin Yining thought about it and told Ziyuan, "Tell the steward to reply that I am free this afternoon. If the Countess of Anping is willing to come, I will definitely welcome her." Ziyuan was not literate, but her memory was very good. After hearing Qin Yining's words, she immediately remembered them. She bowed and quickly retreated. Bing Tang smiled and said, "Among the new servant girls, Ziyuan is the smartest. I think Han Xiao is also good." Ji Yun smiled and said, "Wang Fei is also carefully cultivating the two of them." "Yes," Qin Yining said, "Ziyuan is very smart. Han Xiao's personality is somewhat like Qiu Lu's. She is very steady." Ji Yun and Bing Tang both smiled and continued to do needlework. Ji Yun asked, "This is the first time the Countess of Anping has come to visit. I have never seen you meet her in private before." Qin Yining said, "I have met the Countess of Anping a few times. When Wang Yi and I were not married, the Empress Dowager hosted a banquet in Xin and Palace to entertain the families of the nobles and officials. Wang Yi was so angry that he flipped the table. At that time, the Countess of Anping was present. It is said that the Countess of Anping is an old official of Beiji. Like the Duke of Changhua, she was left behind by Your Majesty to show her benevolence. Usually, she is far away from the center of power. She's just a noble in name and enjoys her old age." Ji Yun nodded and said, "You should be mentally prepared for such a person to suddenly come to you." Qin Yining nodded. "It's okay. Both of you will follow me in the afternoon." Bing Tang and Ji Yun both smiled and agreed. After lunch, the Countess of Anping came. The Countess of Anping was about 40 years old. She was tall and had a long face with wrinkles on it. Her glossy black hair was tied into a bun and held in place by 3 silver hairpins. She wore no other accessories or makeup. Seeing that she was wearing a sapphire blue narrow-sleeved robe and a dark blue long skirt, Qin Yining guessed that the Countess of Anping's family might have just had a funeral. Qin Yining warmly welcomed her and invited her into the warm room to have tea. Chapter 9:16. Qin Yining smiled politely. "Many thanks, Countess of Anping, please take a seat. I don't dare. Wang Fei, please. Countess of Anping and Qin Yining greeted each other courteously before sitting side by side. Ji Yun and Bing Tang served refreshments and then quietly retreated to a corner. Qin Yining handed a teacup to Countess of Anping. Please have a taste. This is black tea that just came in. The weather is cold. Black tea is good for the body. Countess of Anping saw that Qin Yining was so easygoing and relaxed. In the past, she had heard that the Qin clan was greatly favored by Prince Zhongxun. She was also a daughter of noble birth and was so beautiful. Based on her experience, she assumed that this was a woman with a slightly arrogant temper. Even though the Count of Anping had a noble title, he had not been in power for a long time and had left the center of power for many years. They naturally could not compare to the only prince of this dynasty with a different surname. Therefore, Countess of Anping wanted to make friends and politely chatted with Qin Yining. A moment later, she found that Qin Yining was as easy to get along with as she appeared to be. She did not continue to be careful and spoke more freely. After chatting for a while, Countess of Anping saw that the atmosphere was good and said with a smile, I came to disturb Wang Fei today to invite Wang Fei on behalf of Zhong Yibo and the Bian family. Oh, Qin Yining did not change her expression. Is it about the wedding banquet? You also saw that it is not convenient for me and Wang Yi to attend a banquet. 1. We are afraid of offending the newlyweds. 2. We are in the mourning period and cannot have fun. Wang Fei is right. This is the same as our Fu, Countess of Anping said. Look at me and you know. However, Zhong Yibo, Zhuang Pin, and the Bian family discussed and felt that it would not be good to neglect us like this. For Zhong Yibo's wedding this time, many of the noble families in court are in the mourning period and can only send gifts but cannot attend the banquet. Thus, Count Zhongyi booked a private room in a restaurant not far from Count Zhongyi's mansion. There was no singing or dancing inside, nor was there any musical instruments. Only 2 tables were arranged for a simple meal. Those of us who couldn't attend the wedding banquet could just gather together and have a simple meal. Count Zhong, he also knows about the matter of your Fu, but I ask that Wang Fei and Wang Yi do me the honor of going. Otherwise, Count Zhong, he will feel very apologetic. Qin Yining was a little hesitant. Actually, it was very common to hold another banquet in a quiet place to thank the guests who could not attend the wedding banquet. If the rest of the guests who could not attend the wedding banquet personally nodded their heads, and she and Pang Xiao did not agree, it would be a source of gossip. Not only would it offend people, it would also leave a lot of room for people to talk nonsense behind their backs. Qin Yining did not want to be too unsociable with Pang Xiao. Countess of Anping saw Qin Yining's hesitation and said with a smile, Wang Fei is worried that there will be no familiar people going? The 2 of us hit it off so well. When the time comes, we can sit next to each other and I can introduce you. Most of the madams and misses in the city are very easygoing. In the future, you will naturally become familiar with them. This was one of the reasons why Qin Yining wanted to go. She was not familiar with the upper-class women in court. When she returned to Jing and settled down, the first thing she needed to do was to understand the interactions between the women. With this opportunity, she could enter the circle of upper-class women early and not have to find another opportunity. Qin Yining guessed that Pang Xiao would be jealous. However, they both knew the importance of the matter. Pang Xiao was a reasonable person and should agree with her decision. Thinking of this, Qin Yining did not hesitate. She nodded and said, Countess of Anping is right. When will it be? Hearing her agree, the Countess of Anping smiled and said, On the 8th day of the new year, on the day of their wedding, there's a restaurant called Shun Fu near the Count's estate. Don't worry, we're just looking for another place to have a meal. We won't break the rules. Qin Yining nodded and said with a smile, I will definitely keep the appointment. However, my Wang Yi has not been well recently and is bedridden. Perhaps he won't be able to come along. Since Qin Yining agreed, Countess of Anping already had something to say to the Count of Anping. Moreover, what was Pang Xiao's status? How could he allow outsiders to interfere with what he wanted to do? Countess of Anping agreed and stood up with a smile to bid farewell. Qin Yining personally saw her to the door before returning to the inner residence. Pang Xiao asked for the reason in detail. Qin Yining explained in detail. Finally, she said, "When we returned to Jing, only Duke Ding and a few of your former subordinates dared to visit you while you were bedridden. At this time, there's a lot of danger. We should also find a suitable way to expand our network." Pang Xiao thought for a moment and said, "What you said makes sense. Since that's the case, you should take Ji Yun and Bing Tang with you on the 8th day of the new year. One of them is skilled in martial arts, and the other is good at using medicine. With them by your side, I can feel more at ease. I will also arrange for a few people to secretly protect you. I won't let anything happen to you." Qin Yining was a little surprised by Pang Xiao's attitude. Didn't he not like her to have anything to do with Lu Hong? She admired Pang Xiao for being so reasonable. If a woman who had coveted Pang Xiao for a long time was about to get married and didn't forget to invite Pang Xiao before the wedding, she would more or less feel uncomfortable in her heart. Qin Yining was only thinking about Pang Xiao's magnanimity, but he didn't know that Pang Xiao was cursing Lu Heng's 18 generations of ancestors in her heart. Regardless of who Lu Hong was going to marry or who he was attracted to, he had always coveted his sister Yi in the past. When he couldn't get her, he would even do something behind her back. If it wasn't for his trust in Qin Yining's character and knowing that Lu Hong was only good to concubine Zhuang's cousin in order to curry favor with Li Qiqian and didn't dare to do anything else, he would have directly gone to Zhong Yibao's residence to grab this person's collar and kick him to vent his anger. Although her thoughts were complicated, Pang Xiao appeared to be very magnanimous on the surface. She didn't want Qin Yining to look down on her and think that she was a narrow-minded person. On the 8th day of the new year, Qin Yining got up early in the morning. Ji Yun brought over a crescent-white brocade robe with dark cloud patterns that had been prepared beforehand and helped her wash and change her clothes. Bing Tang skillfully flipped her hands and tied Qin Yining's long black hair into a bun and decorated it with a plain silver phoenix hairpin. Pang Xiao leaned against the big pillow next to the window and read a book. Out of the corner of his eye, he kept looking in Qin Yining's direction. He saw that she was wearing light-colored clothes and there were no gold or gems on her hair. She didn't even wear bright makeup, but her beauty and charm came from the inside out. He didn't even want to blink when he looked at her. Qin Yining finished tidying up. When she turned around, she met Pang Xiao's scorching gaze that was full of admiration. She couldn't help laughing and said, "Wang Yi, what are you looking at?" "I'm looking at how beautiful my sister Yi is." Pang Xiao got up and walked over to Qin Yining. He put his big hands around her and said, "Sister Yi, why don't we not go today?" Qin Yining laughed and said, "We're already prepared. Why not go?" Pang Xiao snorted and said, "Our sister Yi is so beautiful. Why should we let them look at her for nothing?" Qin Yining burst into laughter. Domineering, still domineering. Pang Xiao acted shamelessly. Ji Yun and Bing Tang saw that Pang Xiao and Qin Yining were together again. They suppressed their laughter and quietly retreated. Wang Yi and Wang Fei are so affectionate. Does Wang Yi hate that Wang Fei can't cover her face wherever she goes? Bing Tang joked with a smile. Ji Yun giggled. "You still dare to say that? Aren't you and your family's Huzi like this?" Bing Tang's face immediately turned red. She stomped her feet and glared at Ji Yun. "You bad wench. You only know how to make things up. Don't tell me that you and Imperial Bodyguard Tang haven't. You still dare to say that." Ji Yun's face also turned red. The two servant girls glared at each other. Their cheeks were rosy and their eyes were watery. Qin Yining came out of the room. Seeing them like this, he asked curiously, "What's going on? Are they fighting over sweets?" Ji Yun and Bing Tang couldn't help but laugh. Qin Yining brought the two out. Pang Xiao called Tang Xiu over and whispered a few words to her. The driver and bodyguard of Qin Yining's carriage had been replaced with Jinghu Wei. Their safety was completely guaranteed. When the carriage arrived at Shun Fu Restaurant, the steward guarding the street saw that it was the imperial carriage from Duke of Qin's Fu and quickly came forward to respectfully welcome them. Qin Yining followed the steward into the restaurant and went directly to a private room at the end of the corridor on the second floor. Wang Fei, the women folk are all here. Please come in. Qin Yining nodded and entered the room after the steward announced his arrival. When he looked from outside the door, he thought that this was just a normal room that could fit 1 or 2 square tables. But when he entered, he found that this private room was very spacious. It could fit 8 or 10 tables without a problem. Many womenfolk had already arrived. Just as the Countess of Anping had said yesterday, the womenfolk that came here were all unable to attend for some reason. Everyone attending the wedding banquet was wearing plain clothing. Qin Yining's white robe did not seem out of place among the plain white, ivory white, and sapphire blue of the foreign. The Countess of Anping's sharp eyes noticed that Qin Yining had arrived and hurriedly came forward with a smile. Prince Zhongshuan's consort has come? Come quickly. As she spoke, she affectionately took Qin Yining's hand and walked towards a square table that the womenfolk were sitting around. She smiled and said, "This is Prince Zhongshuan's consort." Some of the womenfolk present looked familiar to Qin Yining, but some were unfamiliar. Qin Yining nodded in greeting without batting an eyelid. Then he followed the enthusiastic Countess of Anping to recognize everyone present. These foreign were different from the other madams of officials that Qin Yining had seen before. These womenfolk were in similar situations. Most of the men and their families had already left the core of power. They all had a bit of a calm and peaceful aura. Perhaps it was because they had not been involved in matters of the imperial court for too long. Each of them seemed to be very peaceful. Even the speed at which they spoke was slower. Each of them was neither fast nor slow and had their own bearing. Qin Yining had a good memory. After recognizing a circle of people, he remembered everyone and analyzed each of their personalities. These foreign were also very familiar with Qin Yining. This woman's life was too legendary. More importantly, the groom of today's wedding had once had some relationship with this woman in front of them. Chapter 9:17. Several of the women present today had attended the banquet with Qin Yining at Sai and Palace. That day, when the Empress Dowager saw Lu Heng, she called him Heng Tajir and almost treated him as her own nephew. At that time, the Qin clan's Yuning was still unmarried. Anyone with eyes could see that the Empress Dowager wanted to play matchmaker. If it wasn't for Prince Zhongshuan daring to flip the table in front of the Empress Dowager, perhaps this Prince Zhongshuan's consort would be called Lu Foreign. When everyone saw Qin Yining, they all had their own thoughts. However, they were all smart people and their statuses weren't low. They wouldn't say things that would make the other party look bad. Instead, they chatted happily. These women, who were far away from politics, naturally tended to talk about daily necessities. They would also talk about some trivial matters of the family. Qin Yining rarely interacted with them. When she was with Pang Xiao, other than romantic matters, it was the politics of the imperial court. Her social circle almost didn't overlap with these noble women. Today, when she saw these women talking about trivial matters and finding joy in each other, Qin Yining couldn't help but feel that it was interesting. It was rare that she didn't have to think about life and death matters. It was quite interesting to sit among the noble women and listen to these trivial matters. Wang Fei, have some fruit. Bing Tang brought a small plate of finely cut fruit and placed it next to Qin Yining's hand. Then, she handed a small silver fork inlaid with gems to her. Qin Yining ate the fruit to pass the time. Occasionally, she would chat with the noble women. She didn't speak much, but when she did, her words had substance. These noble women and girls who weren't familiar with Qin Yining now had a new understanding of her. They felt that this was the strength of character that only a woman from a prestigious family could have. After all, Qin Huaiyuan's wise pan and title was known by everyone in Dian and Beiji. In the afternoon, the banquet still hadn't been set up. Ji Yin had already quietly gone out to inquire. When she came back, she whispered in Qin Yining's ear, "The wedding banquet of Lu Mansion is in the evening today, so we will have to wait until then to set up the banquet." Qin Yining nodded in understanding. Although they said that they were having a simple meal, they had gathered together for Lu Heng's wedding, so the timing of the banquet was naturally the same. As a result, Qin Yining was not in a hurry to go back. He took it as a day of leisure for himself. At noon, Everyone ate some snacks and fruits, and a few of the women gathered together to draw tiles. There were also a few who were tired and went to find a private room to rest. Ji Yun and Bing Tang were also worried that Qin Yining would get sick of the smell. They had already discussed with the owner of the restaurant and prepared a private room for Qin Yining to rest. Unexpectedly, before Qin Yining could get up, a wife quickly walked up the stairs. Her footsteps fell on the wooden floor, making a series of hurried footsteps. "Ladies and misses, Madame Zhong Yiba is here." The women who were drawing tiles and chatting stopped what they were doing. They looked at each other and felt that it was strange. "Did I hear wrongly? Madame Zhong Yiba? Isn't Madame Zhong Yiba getting married today?" "That's right. The bride shouldn't have gone through the wedding ceremony yet, right? Why did she come out?" The women all felt that it was strange. Qin Yining also stood up in confusion. He looked at Bing Tang and Ji Yun and whispered, "Is Madame Bien really here?" The person outside said so he shouldn't have seen wrongly. Amidst everyone's surprise, a series of footsteps quickly sounded. The door to the private room was pushed open, and a group of maidservants dressed in red and green walked in, escorting a beautiful young woman in her late 20s. The young woman was of medium height, with a pink face and peachy cheeks. The ends of her eyes were slanted, and there was a hint of arrogance in her playfulness. The red robe on her body outlined her voluptuous figure, making her lively temperament even more gorgeous. The upper-class women present were all experienced and knowledgeable people. Once they saw Madame Bien's appearance, they all knew what was going on. "So it really is Zhong Yiba's fiancée." "That's right. The bride actually came out at this time?" Bien Ren didn't greet these women, nor did she bother to respond. Her bright almond eyes stared at Qin Yining. There was 30% understanding in her eyes, 30% envy, and 40% jealousy. "You are from the Qin clan?" Bien Ruhan walked straight to Qin Yining. She didn't call her Wang Fei, nor did she politely call her older sister based on her age. She was actually so unfriendly. Qin Yining couldn't help but raise her eyebrows in surprise. She was actually targeting her? The upper-class women who wanted to take the initiative to talk to Bien Ruhan also stopped and revealed expressions of watching a good show. It had to be known that Lu Heng and the Prince Zhongshuan's consort had almost become a couple. Perhaps they really did have a relationship, and right now, Madame Bien was Lu Heng's newly wedded wife. On the day of the wedding, Madame Bien didn't dress up at home and wait for the bridal sedan to arrive. Instead, she personally came here and targeted the Prince Zhongshuan's consort with jealousy and hatred. They hadn't seen such a good show in many years. If the Prince Zhongshuan's consort and Zhong Yiba didn't have a relationship, then why would this person in front of them act like this? Many of the upper-class women were quietly watching the show, and some of them were exchanging glances. It was clear that they had already fabricated a passionate love and hate entanglement in their hearts. Bien Ruhan ignored everyone and walked to Qin Yining's side. She discovered that she wasn't as tall as the other party, so she didn't want to lose to Qin Yining in terms of aura. She coldly snorted and took 2 steps back. "Everyone says that you're an outstanding beauty. Seeing you today, you really live up to your reputation." She dragged out the last syllable of her voice, not hiding her hostility and harshness at all. "You flatter me. Today is Madame Zhong Yiba's wedding day. The auspicious hour is about to arrive, but Madame Zhong Yiba is willing to entertain guests. Those of us who can't attend the wedding banquet for various reasons are really overwhelmed by this favor." Qin Yining's words caused the other madams to whisper to each other. They had seen many weddings, but they had never seen the bride casually walk around before the wedding ceremony. Bien Ruhan's eyes revealed a hint of viciousness and resentment. "You are indeed a woman with a glib tongue." Qin Yining smiled and said, "Madame Zhong Yiba is too kind." She calmly expressed her thanks, as if Bien Ruhan was sincerely thanking her. Bien Ruhan abruptly took a deep breath and said coldly, "I came here to tell you that you took care of my duke in the past. In the future, with me by his side, you can rest. Don't forget your status. Don't lose your dignity." "What are you talking about?" Whether or not you took care of Zhong Yiba is your business. What does it have to do with me? You're still young, so please think twice before you speak. Don't lose your dignity. Qin Yining's expression turned cold. Her appearance was extremely beautiful, and when she was truly angry, her aura was truly oppressive. Bian Ruhan was stunned by Qin Yining's appearance. When he regained his senses, his face was red with anger. What? Nowadays, people who have done bad things are acting righteous? Do you think that everyone doesn't know what you've done just because you're so righteous and strict? You're just hugging someone's thigh and becoming a lowly consort. Why do you have to be so arrogant? No matter how powerful you are, the Duke will still marry me in the end. The Liu family's madam will still be me. The room was completely silent. The upper-class madams all had their own thoughts. Bian Ruhan's maidservant was so anxious that she was about to cry. She pulled on her sleeve and said, "It's almost time. Young miss, you should go back quickly." "That's right, young Mississippi. It's not good to delay the time." Bian Ruhan snorted. "Just you wait. I'll let you go today. If you dare to seduce the Duke again, I won't let you go." Without waiting for Qin Yining's response, he turned and quickly walked away. This was an unexpected calamity. Qin Yining's face was calm as he elegantly sat back in his seat. He laughed softly. It seems that Zhong Yiba's fu will be very lively in the future. The Countess of Anping recovered from her shock and smiled as she tried to smooth things over. Young girls listen to the wind and jump to conclusions. When they speak, they don't think. "Wang Fei, you must not take it to heart." Qin Yining calmly said, "Of course I won't take it to heart. I'm not the one who has lost the demeanor of a noble family. Wang Fei is so magnanimous." Several matrons also stepped in to smooth things over. They couldn't help but admire Qin Yining. Qin Yining's words about losing the demeanor of a noble family really hit the nail on the head. The Bian family had only produced a concubine. Their family had some wealth. How could they have raised such an arrogant woman who didn't know etiquette? If it had been them, regardless of whether the matter was true or false, they would have fled long ago after being pointed at and criticized in front of others. But Qin Yining didn't seem to mind at all. If she left at this time, it would arouse suspicion. Even if there was nothing between her and Zhong Yiba, it would be said that she had a guilty conscience and was ashamed to see others. Now that she had displayed such magnanimity, it made people look down on Bianshi's words and actions even more. Ji Yun and Bing Tang were already fuming with anger. When the matrons went to do their own things, Bing Tang leaned close to Qin Yining and said in a low voice, "Wang Fei, do you want me to make a medicine? No need." Qin Yining smiled and said, "It's not worth wasting your medicine on such a brainless person." Qin Yining's eyes narrowed slightly, as if they were twinkling with cold light. There must be a mastermind behind the scenes to make a young girl do such a thing. "You suspect concubine Zhuang." Qin Yining smiled and didn't say much. Concubine Zhuang was just a concubine. Who did she have to look at when she did things? She was just a concubine who was working hard to climb up the ranks in the imperial harem. She didn't have any grudges with her. If someone didn't give her a hint, would she dare to offend Prince Zhongshuan? Although Li Qitian was afraid of Pang Xiao, this was something that only a few people knew. In the eyes of the public, Wang Yi was still a great hero. Your Majesty was somewhat negligent, but he still had to go out of the city to welcome him. So Qin Yining had reason to suspect that today's matter was pushed by Li Qitian in order to cause trouble for Pang Xiao. Qin Yining's smile became even gentler. She would definitely break the wings of anyone who wanted to cause trouble for Pang Xiao. If she was asked, could she have guessed wrong? Qin Yining wouldn't consider whether she guessed wrong or not. In any case, Li Qitian was someone she was committed to teaching a lesson to. Who asked him to harm Pang Xiao? The women present didn't mention this matter again. Seeing that the sky was getting dark, the banquet was prepared, and the noble ladies entered the banquet according to their status. Not far away, the sound of joyous music and firecrackers could be heard coming from Zhong Yiba's residence. The women in Shun Fu restaurant also started to have their meals. They were born in noble families, so they naturally paid attention to the rule of not talking while eating. They didn't come purely to eat. so they didn't eat much. After the meal, the waiter served tea. Qin Yining took the tea and continued to chat with the madams. It was almost time for her to leave and return to her residence. Who knew that at this time, another set of footsteps could be heard? The entire Xuanfu restaurant had been reserved. Since someone came, it must be related to the Bo family. Chapter 9:18. When Qin Yining heard this, he subconsciously furrowed his brows. To the side, the Countess of Onping quickly said, "What's wrong with this couple? We don't go to their residence for fear of offending them, but they keep coming to our place one after another." After saying this, she felt that her words were too harsh, and it would be bad if word of this reached Lu Heng's ears. So she added, "It's Zhong Yibao's residence that's so considerate." That's right. The other madams also agreed, but whether or not they were sincere was another matter. The sound of voices came from the corridor, and the door to the private room was pushed open. The bridegroom, dressed in a red python robe, walked in. When Lu Heng was toasting in a residence, he had been forced to drink quite a bit. After walking for a while, he was already tipsy and felt a bit dizzy as he walked. The two servants at his side dutifully followed him to prevent him from making a fool of himself. Lu Heng didn't even have to look for Qin Yining. Her eyes, which were slightly moist due to drunkenness, fell directly on Qin Yining. In the room full of plain colors, Qin Yining was still the most eye-catching one. His elegant attire made him seem even more ethereal. Under the light, his soft and tender skin was like fine porcelain, glowing with a soft matte light. His eyebrows were like distant mountains, and he was as white as snow. The emotions that Lu Heng had been suppressing were like a flood breaking through a dam. For the sake of the big picture, he had no choice but to accept Your Majesty's matchmaking and marry a woman he didn't have any feelings for. He didn't know much about Bien Ruhan, and he didn't have any feelings for him. After meeting him, he only felt that he was an ordinary woman. Just now, he was still suppressing the disappointment in his heart and smiling as he prepared to go fetch the bride. However, the people he arranged at Xuanfu restaurant told him that Bien Ruhan actually dared to cause trouble for Qin Yining in front of him. His words were extremely vulgar, and he made a big fool of himself. Lu Heng was so angry that he almost canceled the wedding on the spot. However, the words of the tactician beside him reminded him. The wedding had been prepared, and the invitations had been sent out. This was a marriage that Your Majesty was the matchmaker. Even if Bien Ruhan was a vulgar and arrogant person, there was no reason for him to go back on his word now that he had agreed. Lu Heng suppressed his anger and bowed to Bien Ruhan. He walked through the crowd of guests to show proper etiquette and then hurried over. He knew that Qin Yining had been wronged, because between him and Qin Yining, it had always been Qin Yining who was the only one who had ever been close to her. She had scrupulously adhered to the virtues of a woman and treated Pang Xiao wholeheartedly. He was the one who couldn't let go of her. However, Bien Ruhan had somehow heard something and dared to say such words in front of so many upper-class women in the capital. "Greetings, madams." Lu Heng forced himself to retract his gaze and bowed. "Please forgive us for our lack of hospitality. Zhong Yiba is too courteous." Everyone was talking at once as they invited Lu Heng to sit down. These upper-class women had just watched a big show. Before they could sort out their thoughts, Lu Heng had arrived. Moreover, as soon as he entered, his gaze had been fixed on the Prince Zhongshuan's consort. It was difficult for everyone not to be curious. An older madam smiled and said, "Marquis Lu is a thoughtful and attentive person. He treats his guests with great care. However, Madame Zhong Yiba, I think that after marrying into the family, she will be influenced by your family's culture and will be better." Her words were very impolite. She directly belittled Bien Ruhan's family in front of Lu Heng. Even if a man didn't like his wife, in front of outsiders, they were still family. Belittling his wife was the same as belittling him. If it was a normal day, Lu Heng would also think this way. However, Lu Heng was currently drunk. In addition, his heart was filled with regret and pity for Qin Yining. He was also afraid that Qin Yining wouldn't want to pay attention to him anymore. This madam's words coincided with his thoughts. Lu Heng agreed and said, "That's right. Today is my wife's fault. On her wedding day, she didn't pay attention to the rules and snuck out. She even spoke nonsense without any basis and offended everyone. This one feels very guilty." After saying this, Lu Heng stood up and bowed apologetically in the direction of Qin Yining. Although there were many people sitting next to Qin Yining, Lu Heng's straightforward apology still caused the madams present to whisper to each other. Anyone with a discerning eye could see that this Master Lu had clearly come to apologize to Qin Yining. Lu Heng turned around and whispered a few words to the manservant beside him. The manservant hesitated. Just as he was about to call out, "Master Lu," he was stopped by Lu Heng. "Why aren't you going?" "Yes." The manservant retreated and went to the door to give a few instructions. Not long after, he brought in a tray with a jar of wine and a small bowl for eating. Lu Heng picked up the jar of wine and opened the mud seal, then poured himself a bowl of wine. "Today's matter was all due to my lack of consideration. That's why my wife came and acted so impudently. I will punish myself with 3 bowls. Please forgive me, madams." As soon as Lu Heng finished speaking, he happily downed 3 bowls of wine in one go. With such a ferocious drinking style, even if these madams still had complaints about Bien Ruhan, they couldn't blame Lu Heng anymore. At least Zhong Yibo had given them enough face. His apology was also quite sincere. In contrast, Lu Heng's thoughtfulness and politeness and Bien Ruhan's arrogance and rudeness were 2 polar opposites. Although these madams hadn't competed in the center of power for a long time, what didn't they know? This kind of woman really wasn't worthy of Lu Heng. Lu Heng probably had no choice but to agree to marry her. Some of the older madams smiled and tried to smooth things over. "All right, we've already eaten so much wine. We still have to consummate our marriage tonight. Zhong Yibo, sit down and rest. Let them serve some hangover soup." Their words warmed up the originally tense and awkward atmosphere. Lu Heng smiled and sat down. He took the hangover soup and placed it next to his hand. At this time, his face was flushed and his stomach was full of wine. How could he drink any hangover soup? At this time, he felt his entire body was hot and his face was burning. It was only because of his good habits and family upbringing that he didn't lose his composure. But his eyes couldn't help but drift towards Qin Yining. At this time, someone sighed emotionally. I still remember that in Ci and Palace, the Empress Dowager almost matched Zhong Yibo and Wang Fei together. But the heavens have their own plans. Yulao's red line has tied Prince Zhongshuan and family Qin Mimi's feet together. Qin Yining was already impatient. These women, who were not very familiar with her, were from a completely different world from her. They were not willing to rest when they had nothing to do and talked about the matters of their own families as a pastime. In addition, the older women were even more unscrupulous in their jokes. It was not easy to put the matter aside, but they actually brought it up again. Lu Heng thought of the scene when he first met Qin Yining. Then he thought of the situation in the palace and the few times they had crossed swords. They had gone through hardships together in the Taitan. She had once thought of him as a friend. But what was going on now? Lu Heng's mind was dizzy. Everything around him had receded. There was only Qin Yining left in his eyes. He smiled bitterly. His eyes were filled with disappointment and reluctance. Actually, back then, Lu Heng hadn't finished speaking when his face suddenly turned cold. Qin Yining splashed a cup of herbal tea on his face. He suddenly stood up and scolded. "Zhong Yibo, wake up. Don't speak nonsense to ruin other people's reputation. Did the 2 of you make an agreement?" The room was completely silent. The madam who had been joking saw that Qin Yining was angry and knew that she had said something wrong. She had angered this Wang Fei. But no one would have thought that the Prince Zhongshuan's consort had such a violent temper. She dared to splash tea on the face of the head of the Lu family. The tea was still stuck to Lu Heng's eyebrows. Lu Heng was slightly dazed. Qin Yining turned to the people in the room and said with a smile, "The day is late. My family's Wang Yi is not feeling well and has been resting in bed. I have also been out all day. It is time for me to leave." "Yes, it is late." The Countess of Anping, who had noticed that the situation wasn't right, agreed. "I should also go back." When the 2 mentioned this, The awkward crowd stood to bid farewell to Lu Hong. At this time, Lu Heng's head was spinning. He couldn't even straighten his tongue. He couldn't hear a single word that these people were saying. These madams saw that Lu Hong was so drunk that he was delirious. Moreover, he had brought his attendants and bodyguards, so they were reassured and bid farewell. Soon, only Lu Hong and his attendants were left in the private room. Count! Before the manservant could finish speaking, Lu Hong closed his eyes and fell to the ground drunk. His mouth was open as he fell asleep. The manservant and bodyguards were extremely shocked. They hurriedly went to support him, but the drunk person was completely unconscious. Not only was his snoring loud, he was also much heavier than usual. Everyone used a tremendous amount of strength to carry Lu Hong out of Shun Fu restaurant with a roll of bedding. They placed him on a temporarily hired carriage. Fortunately, the Count's estate wasn't far from here. The family quickly drove the carriage back to the Count's estate and directly carried the drunken Lu Hong into the bridal chamber. At this time, Bien Ruhan was sitting on the side of the bed with a dragon and phoenix veil over her head. She was extremely bashful as she waited for Lu Hong, who knew that her neck was about to be crushed by the phoenix coronet. What she waited for was the groom, who had passed out drunk. Lu Hong was directly carried onto the bed. He didn't even take off his wedding robes as he continued to sleep, snoring loudly. Bien Ruhan didn't know if she should continue to sit on the bed or avoid it. She had never suffered any grievances since she was young. The wedding night was so different from what she had imagined. She was so angry that she threw the veil on the ground and turned to leave. "Madam, please get some rest." "No, I want to go home." "Madam, if you go out at this time, I'm afraid it will affect you negatively. If concubine Zhuang knows, she will reprimand this servant for not serving Madam well. Please rest for the time being." Bien Ruhan was forcefully dissuaded by the wet nurse who had accompanied her. The wedding night was not going to happen. She curled up in her wedding robes and slept next to Lu Hong. She also couldn't get used to the pungent smell of alcohol. She hid far away and sulked by herself. She even shed a few tears of grievance. Regardless of the Lu family situation, Qin Yining had already told Pang Xiao about today's strange encounter. That being sure is really unreasonable. I don't know what Zhong Yibao's brain is filled with either. I didn't even feel relieved when I threw a bowl of herbal tea at her. Chapter 919. Qin Yining was amused by his tone and burst out laughing. If it was really hot tea, I'm afraid it would burn him. Do you feel sorry for him? Pang Xiao snorted unhappily. I'm just afraid that things will get out of hand and it will damage our reputation. Pang Xiao naturally knew that Qin Yining had a sense of propriety. She was not only doing this for her reputation, but also because she did not want to cause more trouble and fall out with the Lu family at an inappropriate time. However, she was his precious treasure that he was afraid of dropping and melting in his mouth. She had only been out for a day, and she was already being bullied. Moreover, it was Zhong Yibao and his wife who ganged up on her. I don't think that group of women are easy to deal with. I don't know if they're doing it on purpose or not, but they are only trying to cause trouble. How can ordinary women with virtue speak so carelessly? They are even the matriarchs of noble families. Pang Xiao looked down on the noble women present today. To put it bluntly, these women only cared about gossiping about others behind their backs. They didn't think about how others would be criticized. They wouldn't take responsibility for their own words. Especially the woman who deliberately brought up the matter of the Empress Dowager matchmaking Lu Hong and Qin Yining. She was obviously up to no good and deliberately led the topic in that direction. Pang Xiao subconsciously wondered if there was someone who did not get along with her, so she framed Qin Yining. But on second thought, sometimes the hostility between women often came from jealousy. Perhaps someone was jealous of his sister Yi's beauty. Who knows? Pang Xiao hugged Qin Yining even tighter with her big hands. Don't care about them. Anyway, let's not interact with those gossipy women in the future, so as not to make you angry. I know. Qin Yining hugged Pang Xiao's neck and buried her face in his neck. Okay, let's just forget about it. It has nothing to do with us. Don't take it to heart. That won't do. Qin Yining lowered his head and planted a kiss on Qin Yining's forehead. I think that Mr. Liu is clearly not giving up on his evil intentions. He bullied my wife. Do you think a cup of herbal tea will resolve the matter? Don't worry about it. I'll think about it. A jealous man was not someone to be trifled with. All right, all right, all right. I'll do as you say. I won't interfere. Qin Yining's voice was soft. He covered his mouth and yawned. It's more tiring to talk to those unfamiliar people for a whole day than to fight a battle. Hearing this, Pang Zhao's big hands massaged her shoulders and neck. His hands did not feel much flesh, only a layer of skin wrapped around bones. Well, I've asked them to prepare milk and bird's nest for you. Eat a bowl, and we'll go to bed. Pang Zhao said lovingly. I promise I won't torture you tonight. The first half of the sentence was still fine, but the second half started to be frivolous again. Qin Yining hit Pang Zhao. Pang Zhao laughed loudly and hugged her. He didn't know how to dote on such a big darling. After a good night's sleep, the next day, Qin Yining and Pang Zhao stayed at home to recuperate as usual. They gradually started to decline the few visitors. Pang Zhao secretly went out. Qin Yining didn't ask what he was going to do. Wang Fei, Wang Fei. In the evening, Bing Tang said excitedly, Did you know? Yesterday, Madame Zhong Yibo followed Zhong Yibo into the palace to thank him for his grace. In the end, they made a big fuss at Xi'an Palace and disturbed the Empress. Really? Qin Yining was making Zhao Gu'er's little clothes. Hearing this, he said with interest, With her temper, she'll probably suffer in the palace. Not only that, Bing Tang lowered his voice and said, I heard that Madame Zhong Yibo went to complain. She said that Zhong Yibo humiliated her. On their wedding night, the two didn't even take off their wedding clothes. You can even hear this? Qin Yining was shocked. Bing Tang said with embarrassment, I'm not the only one who said it. The woman who went out to buy today came back and said it. She said that it has spread throughout the entire capital. Jian came in with a box and heard Bing Tang say, Isn't that so? Wang Fei, you don't know. Zhong Yibo is such a big shot from an aristocratic family. It's not easy for him to remarry, but it happened to be that kind of person. Now, many people outside are talking about this matter. Supposedly, the people of Zhong Yibo's Fu are fierce and rude. They offended the Empress Dowager and the Empress. Later, Your Majesty was alerted. Your Majesty reprimanded Zhong Yibo's madam. Even the favored Zhuang Pin suffered and was almost demoted to Jowie. TSK, if I were Zhuang Pin, even if I had a marriage alliance, I wouldn't choose a cousin with such a temperament. Bing Tang clicked his tongue. Wouldn't letting her out cause trouble for herself? Zhuang Pin probably has a weak temperament, right? Supposedly, if it wasn't for Zhuang Pin's delicate beauty and someone who stand aloof from worldly affairs, Your Majesty would have let her off. The Bien family would have lost a lot of face. Qin Yining listened to the two Yada chatter and thought of Bien Ruhan's appearance. He couldn't help but shake his head. Her life was too good, and her parents and elders spoiled her. That was why she was such a girl. But this couldn't be blamed on her parents. There were many parents in the world who spoiled their children. Not all of their children were like Bien Ruhan. Qin Yining shook his head. She didn't take this matter to heart. Pang Zhao didn't bring this matter up again. He continued to claim that he was ill and recuperated. He left the court. 2 days passed like this. There was another rumor in the Bien Fu. Supposedly, when Bien Shu returned home, she was punished to kneel in the ancestral hall and wasn't even given food. Zhong Yibo also returned after a short while. He left Bien Shu at her maternal home and didn't stay at his father-in-law's home to eat. A big wedding that caused such discord. This rumor was too widespread. It overshadowed many of the rumors on the day of the wedding. Now, Zhong Yibo had married an unruly shrew. Everyone knew about it. Because of the rumors that Your Majesty treated meritorious officials harshly and bullied great heroes. Now, it wasn't just Prince Zhongshuan who was treated harshly by Your Majesty. Many people in the streets were talking about it. Zhong Yibo's marriage was set up by Your Majesty. No matter what kind of woman Your Majesty set up, it wouldn't be good for a subject to refuse, right? That's why the patriarch of a big family like the Liu family, who also has a noble title, married such a shrew. Could this also be some people didn't dare to say more, but everyone understood the unspoken words? It was easy to associate this matter with the harsh treatment Prince Zhongshuan received when he returned to the city. It was obvious that Your Majesty's harsh treatment of his subjects wasn't accidental. It said that Prince Zhongshuan is still miserably recuperating in the prince's mansion. Your Majesty hasn't given Prince Zhongshuan an official position. An official position? It's good enough that he hasn't been impeached. It's only been a few days. Who knows when a basin of shit will be thrown at him again? The person who spoke sighed. This kind of rumor didn't exist only in the city. People were saying it almost everywhere. Li Qiqian quickly received the news. Your Majesty, this subject's words are true. Those ignorant commoners are indeed spreading this kind of rumor. As an imperial censor, it is this subject's duty to report the truth to Your Majesty. In the imperial study, a middle-aged official knelt on the ground and spoke righteously. Li Qiqian naturally trusted him. This person was his trusted aide and had been very steady in his work for many years. Although he didn't have a meteoric rise, he had relied on his own ability to rise through the ranks in the imperial censorate. Minister Liu, you may rise. Thank you, Your Majesty. Imperial censor Liu stood up with an upright appearance. He didn't even look at Li Qiqian's expression as he continued. This subject has another matter to report to Your Majesty. Li Qiqian rubbed his forehead. Speak. Imperial censor Liu said. This subject has discovered that Zhong Yibo is privately selling official positions and titles to fill his own pockets. The officials who sell them clearly mark the price, and there are even times when the highest bidder wins. For example, the imperial envoy that was sent to the old capital of Dian, Sir Liu, was an official position that Zhong Yibo sold. That one sentence was like a sudden clap of thunder, truly shocking the people who heard it. For a moment, the imperial study was so quiet that one could hear a pin drop. When Xiong Jinshui and the other servants heard this, they were so scared that they didn't dare to make a sound. They quietly hid in a corner, afraid that Your Majesty wouldn't notice them. Imperial censor Liu, who had lit the firecracker, was still standing there like a pine tree. Li Qiqian's head throbbed with pain. Impossible. Liu Tingzhong was personally arranged by us. No matter how capable Liu Heng is, how could he make us listen to his every word? Not to mention this imperial envoy, just the appointments, evaluations, and promotions of officials above the level of county magistrate were all personally approved by us. You said that the Liu family sold official positions? Could it be that they fed us a bewitching potion to make us agree? Your Majesty, this subject didn't mean that. However, it is an indisputable fact that the Liu family sold official positions. There were people in the Liu family who deceived Your Majesty, and there were also people who deliberately led Your Majesty to succeed in profiting from this. Imperial censor Liu thought for a moment, then said, this subject will give a concrete example. A few days ago, there was a merchant in the south. In order for their business to prosper, they wanted a reliable official to take care of them. However, the local officials were tough, so they thought of a way to buy a local imperial envoy. This way, they could run amok without any hindrance. This merchant begged the Liu family, and the Liu family completed the task of buying the imperial envoy. However, the merchant refused to pay the promised revenge to the Liu family. It was said that they didn't give the Liu family a single copper coin and even ordered people to freeload in the Liu family for a long time. The Liu family completed the task, but they didn't receive any money. In a fit of anger, they tormented the merchant until he closed down. This subject dares to speak bluntly in front of Your Majesty today. The Liu family sold an imperial envoy, that is, official Liu's position, but they didn't receive any revenge from the merchant. Not only did they destroy the merchant, but they definitely won't be satisfied. They will only be satisfied when the position of imperial envoy is taken back. Li Qiqian's brows furrowed as he listened. You're saying that the Liu family will try to influence us and have us replace Liu Tingzhong? Imperial censor Liu said, whether it is true or not, Your Majesty will slowly find out. Li Qitian knew that Imperial censor Lu wasn't someone who spoke without thinking. At this time, he was somewhat skeptical. At the beginning of the 4th month, it was time for the official political examination. Coincidentally, someone from the Ministry of Personnel just happened to send a memorial to Li Qitian, saying that the inspection of Lu Tingzhong, who was the imperial envoy in the south, should have been completed and that he could be transferred back to his original position. He explained the reason in the memorial and asked for Li Qitian's approval. In the past, there were many appointments and removals of officials that were sent in memorials like this by the Ministry of Personnel, and Li Qitian personally reviewed them. You're tuning into the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.